The Duke of Ashcombe slammed his hand against the locked door of the West Wing and told the woman on the other side to leave immediately. She did not move. She simply looked at the lock, then looked at him and said, "Your Grace, the damage behind this door is structural. If you leave it another season, the ceiling comes down." He stared at her. Nobody spoke to him like that. Nobody had in 12 years. And the worst part, the part that stayed with him long after she walked away, was that she was completely right. Before we begin, subscribe to the Duke's Diary and stay with this story until the very end. Tell me in the comments which city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The carriage arrived at Ashcombe Hall on a Tuesday morning in late October, and no one came out to meet it. This was not an accident. Alexander Renford, 8th Duke of Ashcombe, had been very specific in his instructions to the household staff. The restoration specialist was to be shown to the East Wing office, given access to the architectural drawings already laid out on the central table, and left entirely alone. There was to be no formal welcome, no introductory tea, no ceremony. He did not want ceremony. He wanted the work done and the person gone. Thomas, his head steward, had delivered the instructions with the careful neutrality of a man who had long ago accepted that his employer's logic operated on a frequency most people could not detect. He did not argue. He relayed the instructions. And then at precisely 9 o'clock, he appeared in the doorway of Alexander's study with an expression that communicated something had already gone wrong. "She is not in the East Wing office, Your Grace." Alexander looked up from the ledger in front of him. "Where is she?" Thomas paused. "The West Corridor, sir." The silence that followed lasted approximately 3 seconds. Then Alexander stood up. He found her standing in front of the locked door, not attempting to open it, not circling it or examining the frame or pressing her ear to the wood, simply standing there with a small leather notebook open in one hand and a pencil in the other, looking at the door. The way someone looks at a sentence they have read twice and still do not entirely believe. She was younger than he had expected, perhaps 28 or 29, dressed practically in deep gray wool. Her dark hair pulled back with the efficiency of someone who had decided years ago that her hair was not the point. She had not heard him approach, or if she had chosen not to acknowledge it, which amounted to the same level of offense. "Miss Whitfield," he said. She turned. She looked at him without the particular quality of startlement he was accustomed to producing in people who had not expected him to materialize directly behind them. She simply looked at him the way she had been looking at the door with attention. "Your Grace," she said. No curtsy. A nod. Slight. "The East Wing office has good light," she said, "but the drawings on the table are 12 years out of date. The east portico extension was added in 1812. It changes the load distribution on the entire south face." She turned back to the door. "This wing is the reason I am here. I assumed beginning here made structural sense." "You assumed incorrectly." She wrote something in her notebook. "May I ask what the West Wing has been used for in the past 12 years? "No." She looked up. "The reason I ask is practical, Your Grace. Usage history determines deterioration patterns. If the wing has been sealed and climate uncontrolled, I am looking at wood warping, possible moisture penetration along the north exterior, and almost certainly damage to the plasterwork above the secondary staircase. Your assessment is very thorough for someone who has not yet been inside. I read the original architectural records before I came. Your father commissioned an addition to this wing in 1803. It was never completed." She tilted her head very slightly. "The incomplete construction creates a vulnerability at the junction point. It is not a design flaw. It is simply what happens when a building holds its breath for too long." Alexander looked at her. In 12 years, a very large number of people had discussed the West Wing with him. Solicitors, estate managers, his aunt repeatedly and at considerable volume. Not one of them had said anything that sounded like that. "The wing is not open," he said. "The wing has a ceiling that will not survive another winter without intervention." She closed her notebook. "I have 2 weeks scheduled here, Your Grace. I would prefer not to spend them apologizing to you for the sections I could not access." "You would prefer?" "Yes." He looked at the door. He looked at her. he said with the specific precision of a man accustomed to being the last word in any room. "You may examine the exterior of the West Wing. The grounds access the exterior walls, the roofline from the East Tower walkway. Thomas will assist you. And the interior is not currently available." She held his gaze for a moment that lasted slightly longer than was comfortable for either of them. Then she opened her notebook again. "Exterior examination today," she said, writing. "I will have a preliminary structural assessment by this evening. If the exterior confirms what I expect, we will need to revisit the interior access question. We will not." She looked up. "Then you should know, Your Grace, that I cannot in good conscience sign a completion assessment for this estate without examining the full structure." She said it the way one states a fact about weather or mathematics without heat, without challenge, simply as a thing that was true. "That is not negotiable on my end. It may be on yours." She turned and walked toward the East Passage, and Thomas, who had been standing at a diplomatic distance throughout the entire exchange, fell smoothly into step beside her. Alexander stood in the corridor and looked at the locked door, and felt something he had not felt in a considerable length of time. He felt off balance. He was not accustomed to it. Ashcombe Hall had 137 rooms. Alexander knew this the way he knew the weight of his title, not because he had counted, but because the number had entered his understanding so long ago that it had become inseparable from the thing itself. His father had told him when he was 7. 137 rooms. Most of them beautiful. One of them essential. He had been managing the estate alone for 14 years since his father's death. In that time, he had made every practical decision correctly. The farms were productive. The tenant houses were maintained. The debts that had accumulated during his grandfather's extravagant period were retired. Ashcombe Hall was by every measurable standard a success. It was also a house that people entered and immediately understood was not quite alive. He had heard this said not to him directly, because very few people said things to him directly, but in the way one hears things in houses full of servants. An overheard comment in the East Corridor. A guest's remark in the library not knowing he was reading on the far side of the shelves. "Extraordinary property," they said. "Such a shame it feels like nobody lives here." He had considered this. He had concluded they were wrong, and that the discomfort they were interpreting as absence was simply the appropriate atmosphere of a house with serious purpose. He had believed this for 12 years. He was not entirely certain he believed it now, standing in a corridor, looking at a door that Eleanor Whitfield had looked at like a sentence she didn't believe. By midday, she had produced a 4-page preliminary note on the East Wing and the South Portico. Thomas brought it to Alexander's desk with the expression of someone who found the efficiency both useful and slightly unsettling. Alexander read it. It was, he thought, the most direct document he had received since his solicitor had informed him of his father's debts in 1808. No flattery, no careful positioning. Numbered observations, each one supported by a specific reference to the original construction records she had clearly read with close attention. Where she was uncertain, she said so. Where she was certain, she said why. She had found in her exterior examination of the West Wing 3 points of significant water ingress along the roofline that he had not known about. His estate manager had not flagged them. His previous surveyor, engaged 18 months earlier for an insurance valuation, had mentioned the roofline in one line and moved on. Eleanor Whitfield had identified them, described their likely progression over the past 3 winters, and estimated the cost of resolution, with the specific confidence of someone who had done this before and knew exactly what she was talking about. At the bottom of the page, in slightly smaller handwriting, she had written, "The West Wing interior access remains the primary unknown in this assessment. I will revise the completion timeline if access is not granted. I will not pad the estimate to compensate for incomplete information." He put the document down. He picked it up again. He read the last paragraph 3 more times. She was in the East Library at 3 o'clock, which was where he found her when he went looking. And else, he did not examine particularly carefully at the time. She had removed several old volumes from the lower shelves and arranged them on the reading table in a sequence that was clearly meaningful to her and appeared to the casual observer completely arbitrary. "The house records from 1802 through 1815, she said without looking up. She had heard him come in. "Your estate manager has them filed by subject, which is useful for specific searches. I prefer chronological. It shows patterns." "Patterns of what?" "Usage. Which rooms were used heavily and which were not. What was purchased when. What was delayed." She turned a page. "Estates tell stories if you read the accounts carefully enough. This one," she paused, "had a very active period through 1808, and then something changed. My father died in 1808. She looked up. There was no performance of sympathy in her expression, no careful arrangement of her features into the particular configuration people deployed when the death of a parent was mentioned. She simply acknowledged the information. "I am sorry," she said, directly, simply. "It was 14 years ago." "Yes." She looked back at the ledger. "It still shows." He stood in the library doorway and watched her read his family's history, and thought that he had engaged approximately 15 people in the past 3 years for various aspects of estate management, restoration, and legal administration, and not one of them had spoken to him the way Eleanor Whitfield spoke to him, like he was a person rather than a title, like the distinction mattered. "What do you know about this estate?" he asked. She looked up. "The factual history or the thing people say about it?" "Both." She sat back in her chair. "Factually, Ashcombe Hall was built in 1763 by your great-grandfather on the foundations of an earlier property. The east wing was added in 1790. The west wing was extended partially in 1803, and the addition was never completed. The estate runs approximately 4,000 acres, primarily agricultural, with a smaller section of managed woodland to the north." She paused. "What people say is that the Duke of Ashcombe is the most disciplined man in the county, that he has refused 3 marriage proposals from families that would have made a lesser man very pleased, and that no one is entirely certain why the west wing has been locked for 12 years. "And what do you think? About which part? The west wing?" She held his gaze. "I think you are protecting something rather than hiding it. Those are different impulses with different architectural consequences." She picked up her pencil. "A person hiding something builds walls to keep people out. A person protecting something builds walls to keep what is inside safe." The library was very quiet. "The west wing is sealed," he said, "because it is damaged. The structural damage is real," she said. "But it is not the reason." She said it without accusation, as a simple observed fact. The way she had said the ceiling was coming down. The way she had said the plasterwork above the secondary staircase. Just a thing she had seen clearly and was reporting. He looked at her for a long moment. "Dinner is served at 7, he said. "Thomas will show you the schedule." He left the library. Behind him, he heard the soft sound of a page turning. She had gone back to work. Dinner was not what she had expected. This was, Eleanor reflected, becoming a pattern at Ashcombe Hall. She expected one thing and encountered another, and the gap between the two was consistently interesting. She had expected to eat alone in a side room somewhere, the practical arrangement for a hired specialist rather than a guest. Instead, Thomas had shown her to the main dining room, where the table had been set for 2. Alexander was already there when she arrived. He stood when she entered, which she had not anticipated from a man who had spent the past 6 hours communicating exclusively through Thomas as an intermediary. She had told herself, walking from the East Wing, that she did not care about the formality or the lack of it. She was here for the restoration work. She had a timeline and a methodology, and no interest in the social arithmetic of aristocratic households. She still noticed that he stood. "Miss Whitfield," he said. "Your Grace." She sat. He sat. The soup appeared served by a young footman who moved with the particular speed of someone who had been instructed very clearly not to linger. They ate in silence for a moment. She did not find silence uncomfortable. She had grown up in houses under construction and restoration, following her father from one project to the next. And she had learned early that silence in a working environment was not absence, but productivity. She had also learned that people who were uncomfortable with silence filled it badly, and that the quality of what a person reached for when the quiet became too much told you a great deal about them. Alexander said, "Where were you before this commission?" "Dorset," she said. "A coastal property. The salt air had gotten into the foundation work." "Was it resolved?" "Yes. The east face needed complete reconstruction. The interior retained the original materials throughout." "How long did it take?" 3 months. She looked at him. The owner was reluctant to allow access to the family rooms. It added 6 weeks. He absorbed this. What changed his mind? I showed him photographs of what the damage looked like from the interior. Once he understood what he was actually preserving, the reluctance dissolved. She set down her spoon. People are usually more afraid of knowing the truth than the truth itself warrants. He looked at her across the table. "Is that what you believe is happening here?" "I believe," she said carefully, "that there is something in that west wing that matters to you more than the structural repairs do. And I believe that until I understand what it is, I cannot promise you that my work will give you what you actually need from it. I need the restoration completed." "You need the house to be whole again," she said. "That is a different thing." The footman appeared with the next course. The conversation moved as conversations in dining rooms moved toward the practical, the timeline, the materials she would need, brought in the areas where scaffolding would be required. They talked about Ashcombe Hall, the way two professionals discuss a shared problem, and Eleanor noticed that Alexander, when he was discussing the estate in practical terms, lost approximately half of the careful formality he wore in every other context. I knew this house. He did not just own it. He knew it the way someone knows a place they have walked every day for 30 years. Its moods, its difficulties, the specific sound it made in high winds. He mentioned without sentimentality that the East Library ceiling had developed a particular creak after the hard freeze of 1816. He noted that the North Kitchen garden had not produced well since a drainage adjustment his estate manager had recommended in 1819, and that he had recently concluded the adjustment had been wrong. He paid attention to things. She had not expected that either. When the meal was over and she rose to leave, he said not quite a question, not quite an observation, somewhere between the two. "You did not find the house what you expected." She paused. "What did you expect me to find?" "That is not what I asked." She considered this. "I expected something cold," she said. "A house managed correctly, but not loved." She looked at him directly. I was half right. She left the dining room. Behind her, she did not hear him move for a full 30 seconds. Thomas found her in the corridor outside the West Wing at 6 the following morning. This was not in itself surprising. Eleanor was an early riser by inclination and by professional habit. The best light for assessment was early before the day's activities disturbed the atmospheric conditions she was reading. What was surprising was that she was not examining the door or the walls or the roofline access point she had noted in her preliminary report. She was standing very still, holding something. Thomas approached carefully. He had been with Ashcombe Hall for 22 years. He had developed in that time the gift of reading situations before they fully declared themselves. What Eleanor was holding was a small piece of paper. It had clearly been beneath the west wing door, slipped under or fallen through the gap. It was old. He could see that from 3 feet away. The paper had the particular quality of age, the slightly warm yellowing of something that had been kept in the dark for a long time. She looked up when she heard him. She held out the paper. He looked at it. It was a fragment part of a letter, the top and bottom missing, only the middle section visible. In handwriting, he recognized immediately, though he had not seen it in 12 years. "Could not ask you to choose. I know what your father requires. I know what duty means to you, and I would not diminish that. I am leaving because I love you enough to understand that staying would make it worse for both of us. Please do not look for me. Please do not." The rest was gone. Thomas looked at Eleanor. "Where exactly was this?" he said. "The threshold," she said. "The gap between the door and the floor. It must have been inside, close enough to the door that the draft worked it through." She paused. whose handwriting is on the exterior doorframe. He blinked. I beg your pardon. There are letters carved into the doorframe on the inside edge, very small. I can see the top portion of them through the threshold gap when the light hits correctly. She looked at him steadily. Whose handwriting is that, and who lived in this wing? Thomas was quiet for a moment, that was slightly too long to be comfortable. Her name, he said finally, was Miss Caroline Ferris. He paused. She was engaged to His Grace in 1812. Eleanor looked at the fragment of letter in her hand. She broke the engagement, Thomas said, because it was going to have to be said by someone. Without explanation, she left Ashcombe in the night and wrote to His Grace, only to say that she had made her decision and he should not pursue the matter. He paused. That is the version that has been the accepted account for 12 years. Eleanor looked at the letter fragment again. I am leaving because I love you enough to understand that staying would make it worse for both of us. That is not what this says, she said. No. Thomas agreed. It is not. She folded the paper very carefully. Does His Grace know this exists? She asked. I do not believe so. The West Wing was sealed approximately 3 weeks after Miss Ferris left. His Grace did not re-enter it after the sealing. To my knowledge, nothing was removed. He paused. The room in the north corner of the wing was hers during her time here. Her belongings were left when she departed quickly. The door was locked from the outside. Eleanor stood in the corridor with a fragment of a 12-year-old letter in her hand and understood with the particular clarity she brought to damaged things exactly what she was looking at. Not a house with a locked room. A man with a locked wound. And a piece of evidence that the story he had been living inside for 12 years was not entirely true. She found him in the East Garden at 7. He was walking not the purposeful walk of a man going somewhere, but the walking of a person who has been awake too long and has found that movement manages something stillness cannot. He stopped when he heard her approach. Miss Whitfield, he said. He took in her expression. His own sharpened immediately. What is it? She held out the folded paper. He looked at it. He did not take it. Where did you find that? He said. His voice was very even. The particular evenness of someone applying considerable control. Beneath the West Wing door. The draft must have moved it from inside. She kept her hand extended. You need to read it. I know what the letter says. You know what a letter says. Not this letter. She held his gaze. This is not the letter she sent you. This is a letter she wrote that she did not send. It was still in the room, Your Grace. She left it behind. He looked at the folded paper. He did not move. It changes what you believe about how she left, Eleanor said, quietly, without pressure, the way she said structural things as a simple fact that needed to be part of the record. I cannot tell you whether it changes anything else. That is not my determination to make, but you should read it. The garden was very still. Alexander reached out and took the paper. He unfolded it. She watched his face while he read, not invasively, but the way she watched a document respond to treatment, looking for what the object revealed about itself under careful attention. She saw the exact moment the words landed. Not collapse, not performance. Something quiet and very deep, like a stone dropping through still water, the surface barely moving, but the ripple going all the way down. He refolded the paper. He held it. She did not leave, he said, because she did not love me. No, Eleanor said. She left because she thought she was... He stopped. Because she thought she was protecting you, Eleanor finished. By removing herself from the choice. He looked at the folded paper in his hand. He said nothing. Eleanor said carefully, the fragment is incomplete. There may be more inside the room, or there may not be. But I think you already knew that the explanation you were given was not the full one. She wrote that she had made her decision, he said, that I should not pursue the matter. She told you what she wanted you to believe, not what was true. Eleanor paused. People do that. Sometimes they think it is kindness. He looked at her. What do you do, he said, when you are told something about a damaged thing that turns out to be wrong? When the assessment you were given at the beginning was not accurate? I go back to the beginning, she said. I re-examine everything with the correct information. I find out what was actually there before the damage, not what someone else decided to tell me was there. A long moment. Then, the West Wing, he said. Yes. He looked at the house. He looked at the locked corridor visible from where they stood. He looked at this paper in his hand for the last time, and something in his face resolved, not relaxed, not softened, but resolved in the way of a decision being made precisely. Tomorrow morning, he said, I will have Thomas bring the key. Eleanor nodded. Miss Whitfield. She turned back. He stood very straight in the early morning light, with 12 years of a wrong story in his hand, and he said, You will find things in there that I would prefer had remained undiscovered. I know, she said. I am aware that is not a reason to keep the door locked. No, she said. It is not. Then, he paused, started differently. Be thorough. I always am, she said. She walked back toward the house. Behind her, the east garden was absolutely still, and Alexander Renford, 8th Duke of Ashcombe, stood in it alone, holding a fragment of a letter that had waited 12 years in a locked room to find its way out. He had spent 12 years building a wall around the place where that letter came from. He had spent 12 years being absolutely certain he understood why. And in the space of one morning, a woman who had never asked his permission for anything had stood in his corridor and told him with the same calm directness she applied to damaged roof lines and compromised plasterwork that the foundation of the wall was wrong. He looked at the house. For the first time in 12 years, he looked at the West Wing and did not look away. Lady Margaret Renford arrived at Ashcombe Hall at noon, as she did on the third Tuesday of every month in the way of forces of nature that do not require invitation. She swept through the entrance hall with the authority of a woman who had been managing aristocratic households since before the current Duke had learned to read, handed her coat to the footman without looking at him, and arrived in Alexander's study with the specific energy of someone who had heard something interesting and was trying to decide how much to reveal. There is a woman in your East Library, she said. She is a restoration specialist. I engaged her for the work. She declined tea. Lady Margaret sat down in the chair across from his desk. She said she had 3 hours of daylight remaining and would eat at dinner. She is correct about the daylight. Alexander. His aunt looked at him with the particular expression she had been deploying since he was 7 years old, the one that meant she had something to say and intended to say all of it. I was informed this morning that you have given her access to the West Wing. Silence. Thomas, he said without particular heat. Thomas was concerned, she said, and concern in Thomas's case always results in a brief note delivered to my parlor. She folded her hands. What made you decide? He looked at his desk. She found a letter. Lady Margaret was quiet. A fragment, from Caroline, inside the wing. He met his aunt's eyes. She found it through the door gap before she had ever set foot in the room. She could have kept it, read it, used it as leverage for the access she wanted. He paused. She brought it directly to me. Without reading it, she read enough to know I needed to read it, not enough to satisfy curiosity about what it contained. He said it with the specific quality of someone who had been thinking about this all morning. She told me it changed what I believed about how Caroline left. She told me she could not tell me whether it changed anything else, and then she waited for me to decide what to do with that. Lady Margaret was quiet for a long moment. What was in the letter? She said. Caroline left to protect me, he said. She believed she was making the generous decision. She believed I would live less fully if she stayed. He said it flatly, the way he said things that were accurate and did not require elaboration. She was wrong, but she did not know she was wrong. And you have spent 12 years believing she left because she did not? Yes. The word landed like a stone. Lady Margaret looked at her nephew. This man she had watched build a life around the careful management of distance, around the precise maintenance of a world in which nothing could surprise him, or move him, or leave him. Standing in a corridor, holding a piece of paper that rewrote 12 years of certainty. This woman, she said. Eleanor Whitfield. She is here for the restoration work. Alexander. She is here for the restoration work, he said more quietly. That is all she wants. She has made that very clear." Lady Margaret looked at him for a long moment. Then perhaps she said, "That is where you should begin." She rose, collected herself, and left the study. Alexander looked at his desk, at the work in front of him, at the window beyond which Eleanor Whitfield was somewhere in the East Library, reading his family's accounts with a pencil in her hand, and no interest whatsoever in his title. He thought about what she had said at dinner. "I expected something cold. A house managed correctly, but not loved. I was half right." He thought about the West Wing door, about what was on the other side of it, about what it would mean to open it properly with someone present who would look at whatever she found and say simply and directly, "This is what is here. This is the damage. This is what can be repaired." No performance, no careful management of his feelings about it. Just the clear-eyed truth of someone who had seen damaged things before and understood from long experience that the damage was not the end of the story. He picked up his pen. He put it back down. He went to find Thomas and told him to bring the West Wing key to the archive room that afternoon. She was already at the West Wing door when he arrived. She had her notebook. She had her kit, the leather case with the restoration tools she carried everywhere, the careful contents of which he had observed her lay out that morning with the same methodical attention she applied to everything. She had her pencil tucked behind her ear, which he was beginning to understand was not an affectation, but a simple positioning choice that kept her hands free. She looked at the key when Thomas brought it. She looked at Alexander. "Do you want to do this alone?" she said. He had not expected to be asked. "No," he said. She nodded. She stepped to the side, not retreating, not making space for him to take control, but making space for them both to stand at the door together, which was an entirely different thing. He put the key in the lock. The mechanism moved stiffly. 12 years of disuse, the particular resistance of something that has been still for a very long time. He turned it. He heard the click. He pushed the door open. The air that came out was cold and still and old, the air of a room that had not breathed in a decade. It carried the particular quality of the past, the way all sealed spaces carry it, the sense of a moment preserved rather than lived. They stood in the doorway. Eleanor did not go in immediately. She stood in the threshold and let the light from the corridor fall ahead of them and looked at what it revealed. He stood beside her and looked at the room he had not entered in 12 years. It was exactly as he remembered it. This was the thing about rooms that had been sealed. They remembered the last moment of their occupation. The table with Caroline's sketching materials. The chair she had always pulled away from the desk at an angle because she preferred to sit sideways to it, which had driven his housekeeper absolutely mad. The small writing desk by the window where she had written her letters. He looked at the writing desk. Eleanor moved into the room slowly, with the careful precision of someone who understood that the floor of a sealed room was a record, and that records should not be disturbed until they had been read. She stopped at the writing desk. She looked at the surface of it. She looked at the small drawer beneath it. She looked at him. "May I?" she said. He nodded. She opened the drawer. Inside was a bundle of papers, folded tied with a thin length of ribbon that had faded from what must have been dark red to a pale, uncertain rose. She lifted them out and turned to him and held them out, and her hands were entirely steady, which he noticed because his were not. "There are more," she said quietly. He looked at the bundle in her hands. "She wrote more," he said. "Yes." He took the bundle. He stood in the room that had been sealed for 12 years and held a collection of letters that had waited in a drawer for someone patient enough to find them, and something moved through him that he could not have named if he had tried something that was not grief exactly, because grief was what he had been carrying for 12 years. This was something else. Something that felt in the strange illogic of it, remarkably like the first breath after a very long time underwater. Eleanor walked to the window. She looked at the exterior wall. She said in her clear, even professionally detached voice, "The water ingress I identified from outside enters here. The damage to the plasterwork above the window frame is consistent with what I expected." She made a note. "It is repairable." He looked at her back. "All of it," he said. She turned. She understood he thought that he was not asking about the plasterwork. She looked at him standing in the center of the room with the letters in his hand, and 12 years of a wrong story behind him, and a door that was finally, after all of it, standing open. "I have not yet seen damage," she said, "that did not have more structure beneath it than was apparent from the outside." She paused. "I cannot promise you it will be easy. That has never been the nature of this work." She held his gaze directly. "But yes, Your Grace, all of it." He stood in the cold air of the West Wing and held the letters and looked at the woman who had arrived at Ashcombe Hall 2 days ago with no interest in his title, no intention of being impressed by his reputation, and no patience whatsoever for locked doors she had been hired to open. The woman who had found a letter through a gap in a door and brought it directly to him without a second's hesitation. The woman who stood in a damaged room and told him simply and honestly that damage was not the end of the story. He looked at the letters in his hands. He thought, "She is the first person who has spoken to me honestly in 12 years. He thought, "She is the only person who has looked at this house at me and asked what it was before, rather than passing judgment on what it had become." He thought, "She is leaving in 2 weeks." And for the first time in 12 years, the thought of a person leaving Ashcombe Hall felt like something he could not simply fold away and manage at a distance. He thought, "This is going to be a problem." Outside the West Wing, the October wind moved through the grounds of Ashcombe Hall, and for the first time in 12 years, the air in the West Corridor did not feel entirely closed. The door was open, and neither of them in that moment was in any particular hurry to close it again. He read the letters that night, all of them. He did not plan to read them all. He sat down in the chair by the fire in his private study with the bundle in his lap and told himself he would read 1, perhaps 2, and then set them aside and think carefully about what to do next. That was the rational approach. That was how he handled difficult information with distance and deliberation, never in the immediate heat of discovery. He read every word Caroline had ever written and not sent, and by the time he finished, the fire had burned down to ash, and the clock on the mantel said 20 minutes past 2 in the morning. She had written 12 letters, one for each year, he realized, dated every October the month she had left. She had written them somewhere else had she kept writing after she left, or had she written them all before she went and simply dated them forward, knowing she would not be there to send them? He could not tell. The handwriting changed slightly across the years, a little more settled, a little less urgent, but the voice was the same throughout. Quiet, honest, completely without self-pity. She had not written to accuse him. She had not written to explain herself in the way of someone seeking absolution. She had written because she needed somewhere to put the truth, and she had put it in a room she was never going back to. In a drawer she expected would stay closed. She had written, "I did not leave because I stopped loving you. I want you to know that even though you will never read this, I left because I watched your father die in pieces, and I watched you hold everything together, and I understood in a way I think you were not yet able to understand yourself. That duty was not a cage you were living in. It was the architecture of who you are, and I could not ask you to tear down your own architecture for me." She had written, "I wonder sometimes if you believed I did not love you enough to stay. I hope you did not believe that. I hope more than anything that you did not spend years thinking it was a failure of feeling on my part, because it was not. It was the opposite. It was the most complete feeling I have ever had for anyone, and it was precisely because of that completeness that I knew I had to go." He sat with the last letter for a long time. Then he got up, went to the window, and looked at the dark grounds of Ashcombe Hall. The east garden was barely visible, just the shapes of it in the autumn dark. The west wing was to his left, the door closed again now but not locked. He had not relocked it. He had not been able to bring himself to. He stood there for a long time, and what he felt was not grief exactly. It was something older than grief. It was the specific feeling of understanding that you have been wrong about something for so long that the wrongness has become structural, built into the foundation of how you have been living, and now that you can see it clearly, you understand why the house never felt entirely right. Caroline had not abandoned him. She had sacrificed herself for him. And he had interpreted that sacrifice as rejection, and had built an entire life around the interpretation. 12 years. He thought about Eleanor. He did not intend to think about Eleanor. He intended to think about Caroline, about what the letters meant, about what he was going to do with the information now that he had it. But his mind moved to Eleanor with the quiet inevitability of something that has already made a decision without consulting the part of him that preferred to be in charge of decisions. She had found that letter through a gap in a door. She had read enough to know it mattered, and not enough to satisfy her own curiosity about it. She had handed it to him immediately. Nobody did that. Nobody in his experience encountered private information that could give them an advantage and simply handed it over without using it first. I went back to his chair and sat down and thought about a woman who had arrived at his estate 2 days ago with a leather toolkit and a notebook and absolutely no interest in being impressive, who had looked at his locked door and said, "This is not damaged, it is abandoned," who had sat across from him at dinner and said I was half right with the same calm directness she used to discuss plasterwork and drainage. I thought she is going to find things in the West Wing that are going to be very hard to watch her find. He thought, she is also the only person I have encountered in 12 years who I actually trust to find them. He did not sleep. Eleanor was in the West Wing at first light. She had not waited for him, which was correct. She had work to do, and she had been given access, and she did not require supervision to do her job. She had her notebook and her kit, and she was working her way systematically along the north wall when he appeared in the doorway at 7:30. She did not stop working. "You read them," she said. It was not a question. "Yes." She moved along the wall, pressing lightly at intervals, checking for hollow spaces behind the plaster. "All 12. He paused. "How did you know there were 12? "I counted the pages in the bundle when I handed it to you." She crouched to examine the baseboard. "I was not reading the content. I was assessing the volume of material." "Is there a difference?" She looked up at him. "For me, yes. Always." He came into the room. He had not been inside it properly since the previous afternoon, just the threshold, just enough to take the letters and leave. Now he was fully in it, and he felt the weight of it settle around him, the way the weight of a room settles when you have been absent from it for a very long time, and it remembers you anyway. "She was not angry," he said. "In the letters." Eleanor kept working. "She understood me more clearly than I understood myself at the time." He paused. "She knew that duty was not something I was enduring. She knew it was how I was built." He looked at the window. "She left to protect that." Eleanor set down her brush. She turned to face him. "And you spent 12 years believing she left because she did not love you enough to stay." "Yes." "That is a very heavy thing to carry incorrectly." "Yes," he said. "It is." She looked at him for a moment. Not with pity. He registered this clearly, because pity was something he would have felt immediately and reacted to, and this was not it. What she looked at him with was the same clear attention she gave everything. Patient, honest, seeing what was actually there. "What will you do with the letters?" she said. "I don't know yet." "That is a reasonable answer. Is it?" He looked at her. "It does not feel reasonable. It feels like another form of not deciding." "There is a difference between not deciding and not yet knowing what the right decision is," she said. "One is avoidance, the other is patience." She picked up her brush. "You have been making decisions alone for a very long time. Not every choice has to be made before the information is fully in." He looked at her back as she returned to the wall. "Miss Whitfield," he said, "Your Grace, why did you come here this commission specifically? Of all the estates that must have required restoration work this season." She was quiet for a moment. "Your estate manager wrote to my father's firm 18 months ago inquiring about restoration consultancy. My father died before he could respond. I found the letter when I was closing his files." She pressed her hand against the plaster. The inquiry was detailed. Whoever wrote it clearly understood what restoration work actually involves, rather than what most people assume it involves. That was unusual. A pause. "I wrote back." "You wrote back to a letter addressed to a dead man's firm." "I wrote back because the inquiry deserved a response." She turned to look at him over her shoulder. Also because the West Wing problem as described was interesting, architecturally. Only architecturally. She held his gaze. That was the reason I came, she said. What I have found since arriving is a separate matter. The room was very quiet. What have you found? He said. She turned back to the wall. A house that is trying very hard to be less alive than it actually is, she said. And a man who has been helping it. He stood in the center of the room he had sealed 12 years ago and looked at the back of the woman who had been here for 48 hours and already understood more about what was wrong with Ashcombe Hall than anyone who had lived within its walls for a decade. I was not sure whether this was deeply unsettling or the first genuinely useful thing that had happened here in a very long time. He suspected it was both. Lady Margaret found Eleanor at noon in the corridor outside the portrait gallery. Eleanor had a list. Lady Margaret could see it from several feet away, a handwritten list detailed, organized by location. The kind of list that a person makes when they are working very seriously and have found significantly more to do than they originally anticipated. You are expanding the scope, Lady Margaret observed. The east corridor ceiling has water damage that was not flagged in the original survey. It is connected to the roofline issue in the west wing, the same source moving inward. Eleanor made a mark on the list. If it is not addressed with the west wing work, the corridor ceiling will require full replacement within 3 years. It is more efficient to address it now. My nephew agreed to this. I have not yet asked him. Eleanor looked at her list. I am asking you first. Lady Margaret was very still for a moment. Then she said, Why? Because you have been managing this household in the ways he does not notice for longer than I have been here, Eleanor said. And because the east corridor ceiling is directly above the main staircase, which means the repair work will be disruptive to the daily household operation. That is your domain, not his. Lady Margaret looked at her. She had been looking at Eleanor carefully since she arrived with the specific attention of a woman who had spent 65 years reading people accurately and had found in Eleanor Whitfield something that required very particular reading. You are not what I expected, Lady Margaret said. I am aware that is being said frequently this week, Eleanor replied. Sit down, Lady Margaret said. They sat. My nephew, Lady Margaret said, has been alone in a very specific way for 12 years. Not physically alone, there are 40 people in this household. Alone in the way that matters. Do you understand the distinction? Yes, Eleanor said. He is not cold. People believe he is cold. He is not. Lady Margaret folded her hands. He is someone who decided after a significant loss that the safest architecture for a life was one in which nothing could surprise him. He has built that life with great precision. She paused. You have been here 3 days, and you have opened the west wing and found something inside it that has knocked that architecture sideways. I want to know if you understand what that means. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. It means he is going to need time to rebuild his understanding of the past 12 years. It means he is going to be vulnerable in a way he has not been since he was 26 years old, Lady Margaret said. And vulnerability in a man who has spent 12 years specifically avoiding it can go one of 2 ways. She looked directly at Eleanor. It can open him, or it can make him shut down harder than before, and this time the wall will be thicker. I know, Eleanor said. Do you? I work with damaged things, Lady Margaret. The most critical point in any restoration is not the beginning, and it is not the end. It is the middle, when you have opened something up, and it is at its most exposed, and the new structural support is not yet fully set. She met the older woman's gaze. I am aware of what the middle looks like. Lady Margaret looked at her for a long, considering moment. He asked Thomas this morning, she said, how long your commissions typically run. Eleanor said nothing. Thomas told him. 3 months for a property of this scale, if the scope expands, as Thomas expects it will. Lady Margaret's expression did something small and precise. Alexander said nothing, but Thomas said he looked at the east corridor ceiling for approximately 30 seconds before he went back to his study. Eleanor looked at her list. The east corridor ceiling, she said, genuinely does need to be addressed. I know it does, Lady Margaret said. "I am not suggesting otherwise." A pause. "I am simply noting that it is interesting the things a house reveals when someone finally looks at it carefully." Eleanor made another mark on her list. "The ceiling," she said. "Do I have your support to raise it with His Grace this afternoon?" "You have my full support," Lady Margaret said. And then, because she was 65 years old and had earned the right to be direct, for all of it. Howe was in the East Library when she found him. He had a letter in front of him. Not Caroline's letters, something else, correspondence from the look of it official. He folded it when she came in. "The East Corridor ceiling," she said. "Thomas told me you were looking at it. The damage is connected to the West Wing roof line. Same water source, same ingress point moving laterally." She set her notebook on the table between them. "If we address the West Wing and leave the corridor, you will be doing this again in 3 years. He looked at her notes. He did not look at them the way someone looks at a report they intend to dismiss. He looked at them the way he looked at everything she produced, with genuine attention. "What does the timeline extension look like?" he said. 3 months total rather than 2 weeks, with the full scope." He was quiet. "That is a significant change," he said. "Yes." "And you are willing to extend your time here by that much?" "I am proposing the work," she said. "I would not propose it if I were not willing to do it." He looked at her. She looked back. The silence between them had changed over the course of 48 hours. It had lost the particular quality of two strangers in an unfamiliar arrangement and had gained something else, something more settled, which neither of them was examining too carefully yet. 3 months, he said. Approximately. He picked up his pen. He set it down. He said, "There is something you should know if you are going to be here for 3 months." "All right. The letter I received this morning." He gestured toward the folded correspondence on the desk. "It is from a solicitor, a man named Harwick, writing on behalf of a consortium of landowners in the county who have raised a formal concern about the management of the Ashcombe estate." He paused. "They are suggesting that the estate has been mismanaged, that the delayed work on the West Wing is evidence of neglect. They are requesting an independent assessment." Eleanor looked at the letter. "They are not wrong that the work has been delayed," he said. "But the reason for the delay is not what they believe it to be, and an independent assessment conducted without context would likely confirm their concerns about the surface evidence without understanding what is beneath it." "When is the assessment requested by?" 6 weeks. She looked at her notebook. She did a rapid calculation that he could see her doing, not performing it, actually calculating the specific focused look of someone who is doing genuine arithmetic in their head. 6 weeks is sufficient to address the primary structural concerns in the West Wing and the East Corridor, she said. "If we begin immediately, if we bring in additional labor for the roofline work, and if the weather holds, we can have documented evidence of active and competent restoration completed before their assessor arrives." He looked at her. "You want to use the restoration as a defense." "I want to do the restoration because the restoration is needed," she said. "That it also happens to comprehensively answer their concerns about estate management is an additional benefit." She paused. Neglect and grief look the same from the outside. The difference is only visible when you understand what was actually happening inside. He looked at her for a long moment. "You have been here 3 days, he said. "I know. You have turned a 2-week commission into a 3-month project, identified a legal threat I was already aware of, and proposed a solution that addresses both the structural and the reputational problem simultaneously. Is that a complaint?" "No," he said. He said it with the quiet, unornamented directness that she was beginning to recognize as his version of sincerity. "It is an observation." She gathered her notebook. She stood to leave. "Miss Whitfield." She paused. "The consortium's assessor," he said. "He will want access to the full property, including the West Wing." "I know," she said. "You understand what that means." "It means the work inside the West Wing needs to be far enough advanced by the time he arrives that the narrative is clear." She met his eyes. "The narrative being this room was not neglected. It was preserved. There is a difference, and anyone with the right eye can see it." He said nothing for a moment. Then, "Do you have the right eye?" "Yes," she said. "No qualification. No false modesty. Simply the truth." He almost smiled. She was nearly certain of it, the slight movement at the corner of his mouth gone before it fully arrived. "Then we had better begin," he said. Sebastian Vale arrived the following afternoon without warning, which Eleanor gathered was his standard method of arrival, based on the complete absence of surprise in Thomas's expression when the carriage appeared. How was 40 broad-shouldered with the comfortable ease of a man who has never particularly worried about what rooms thought of him. He shook Alexander's hand in the entrance hall with the genuine warmth of someone who actually liked the person he was greeting, which Eleanor noted because she had not seen anyone greet Alexander that way since she arrived. He saw Eleanor immediately. "Lord Sebastian Vale," Thomas said, "Miss Eleanor Whitfield." Sebastian looked at her with the frank curiosity of someone who has just been told something interesting and is confirming it with his own observation. "The restoration specialist," he said. "Yes. Alex mentioned you in his letter." He said it easily, glancing at Alexander with the confidence of an old friend who knows exactly which buttons he is pressing. Alexander's expression did not change. "I mentioned the commission." "You mentioned the commission for 3 paragraphs, Sebastian said, "and Miss Whitfield for 2, which for a man who typically discusses property and twice the detail of people is notable." He smiled at Eleanor. "He said you found the West Wing within the first hour." "Within the first 20 minutes, actually," Eleanor said. Sebastian's smile widened. He looked at Alexander. "I like her," he said. "I noticed," Alexander said. They went to the drawing room, and Eleanor turned to go back to the West Wing, and Sebastian said easily, but clearly, "Please join us, Miss Whitfield. I have questions about the East Corridor ceiling that Alex will not be able to answer, and you apparently will." She looked at Alexander. He looked at her. He said nothing, which she had learned was his particular way of indicating that the decision was hers. She went to the drawing room. Sebastian asked about the ceiling for approximately 4 minutes. Then he asked about the West Wing. Then, with the directness of a man who has decided the indirect approach would waste everyone's time, he said, "Did he tell you about Caroline?" "Sebastian," Alexander said. "She found the letters," Sebastian said. "Thomas told me. She found them and brought them directly to him." He looked at Alexander. "I am not going to sit here and pretend that is not significant. It is her job to handle discovered documents appropriately. Alex." Sebastian set down his cup. He said it the way someone says a name when they want the name itself to do the work. Quiet, no drama, just the weight of a long history and genuine concern. "I have been watching you manage the house, and manage yourself, and manage every single person who comes within 30 feet of you for 12 years. I am your friend. I know the difference between competent management and a man who is afraid." The room was very quiet. Eleanor looked at her hands. "I was not afraid," Alexander said. "You were terrified," Sebastian said. "Not unkindly, just directly. You built this place into a fortress, and you called it discipline, and it worked very well, right up until 3 days ago, when a woman arrived who apparently does not know she is supposed to be impressed by it." Eleanor looked up. Alexander was looking at her. She said, "He is not entirely wrong." Alexander looked at her. "About the fortress part," she clarified. "The rest is between the two of you." Sebastian made a sound that was almost a laugh. "I genuinely do like her," he said to Alexander. "You mentioned that." "Alex." Sebastian leaned forward. The ease dropped slightly, and what was underneath it was something older and more serious. "Caroline's letters. What are you going to do with them?" "I don't know." "That is not an answer." "It is the only accurate one I have." Sebastian looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Eleanor. And Eleanor saw in the look the specific thing that old friends do when they are trying to communicate something to someone else about the person they both know, the silent conversation happening above the surface of the spoken one. She understood what he was communicating. He was saying, "He trusts you. I don't know how you did it in 3 days, but he does. Please be careful with it." She held his gaze for a moment. She nodded very slightly. He nodded back. "Tell me about the consortium," Sebastian said, turning back to Alexander. The solicitor's letter. Alexander told him. Sebastian listened without interrupting, which she was learning was unusual for him. When Alexander finished, Sebastian said, Harwick is Pembroke's man, you know that. I know. Pembroke wants the northern woodland parcel. He has wanted it for 4 years. I know that too. So this is not a genuine concern about estate management. It is an acquisition strategy dressed in legal language. Yes. Sebastian looked at Eleanor. And you are planning to use the restoration work as a counter-argument. The restoration work is genuine, Eleanor said. The fact that it counters a bad-faith legal strategy is secondary. But useful. Yes. Sebastian sat back. He looked at Alexander with the expression of someone arriving at a conclusion they have been building toward for some time. You know what I am going to say. I do, Alexander said. Then I will say it anyway, because that is apparently what I am for. Sebastian looked at his old friend directly. The consortium is not the real problem. The real problem is that you have been running this estate as though the goal was to need nothing from anyone, and that posture has made you look exactly like what Harwick's letter says you are. It has to change. He paused. Not just for legal reasons. Alexander was quiet. Eleanor stood to give them privacy. Sebastian said, You do not need to go. But Alexander said nothing, which meant he was not going to ask her to stay. She went to the West Wing. She stood in Caroline's room for a long time alone with the tools in her kit and the cold air and the particular silence of a space that had been holding its breath for 12 years. She thought about what Lady Margaret had said, about the middle of a restoration being the most critical point, when everything is open and exposed and the new support is not yet set. She thought about Sebastian's look across the drawing room. She thought about Alexander saying, I don't know yet, and the way it had sounded like the first honest thing he had said in a very long time. She opened her kit. She began to work. She was repairing the water damage along the window frame. Careful, methodical, the particular attention of someone who has learned to slow down precisely when the impulse is to hurry when she heard his footsteps in the doorway. She did not stop working. Sebastian is staying for dinner, he said. I know. He told me when he passed through the corridor 5 minutes ago. A pause. He told you before he told me. He asked if I had any dietary preferences, which suggests he has made himself responsible for the kitchen arrangements. She pressed the consolidant gently along the damaged section. He seems to do that, organize things for other people while appearing to do something else entirely. He has been doing it since we were 15 years old. He came into the room. He stood near the door, not close, at the comfortable distance that he always chose, the distance that said present, but not presuming. He also told me before he came to find you that you were the most useful person who had entered Ashcombe Hall in the past decade. That is a very low bar if the hall has been closed to most people. He meant it genuinely. She looked up from her work. What did you tell him? Howe was quiet for a moment. I told him I had arrived at the same conclusion. She held his gaze. Something moved through the room between them, not the charged dramatic quality of a declaration, but something quieter and more specific. The recognition of two people who are in the same room and have each noticed that the room is better for the other person being in it. She looked back at her work. The window frame repair is progressing, she said. The plaster above it will need a second treatment tomorrow. By the end of the week, the north wall should be stable enough for the wall covering assessment. And then I will know whether the room can be fully restored to its original condition, or whether there are sections that must be remade rather than repaired. She paused. Remade does not mean worse. Sometimes what comes back is stronger than what was there. He stood in the doorway for a long moment. Miss Whitfield, he said. Your Grace. At dinner tonight. You will sit at the table as a guest, not as a hired specialist. Sebastian will not understand the distinction, and neither frankly will I, if I am being honest. She did not look up. That is the first time you have qualified a statement with honesty as a framing. I noticed that too. She kept her hands moving on the window frame. Outside, the October afternoon was going the particular pale gold of late light, and inside the West Wing, in the room that had been closed for 12 years, Something was slowly and carefully and methodically being put back together. Not the way it was. It was never going to be exactly the way it was. But something. Something that could hold. Something that could last. "Dinner at 7, she said. 7, he confirmed. She heard him leave. She looked at the window frame. She looked at the pale gold light coming through the glass. She thought about 3 months and what 3 months at Ashcombe Hall would mean, and whether she was building a case for work she genuinely needed to do, or a case for something else entirely. She thought about the way he had said, "I don't know yet." Not as avoidance, but as the first honest admission of a man who had been speaking with perfect precision for 12 years and had found unexpectedly that precision was no longer sufficient. She put down her brush. She looked at the room. She thought, "This is going to be harder to leave than I intended it to be." Then she picked the brush back up because the work was not done, and she had not become someone who left things unfinished. Not yet. The second week at Ashcombe Hall arrived with a cold that settled into the bones of the house and stayed there. Eleanor noticed it first in the west wing, where the temperature dropped sharply enough that she could see her breath while she worked. She did not complain about this. She put on an extra layer, moved faster, and noted in her assessment log that the heat retention in the north wall was worse than she had estimated, which meant the insulation behind the plasterwork had deteriorated more extensively than the surface damage suggested. This was in her professional experience, the most common surprise in restoration work. The visible damage was never the full story. The real damage was always deeper, always quieter, always the thing you found only after you had committed to looking. She was thinking about this, about the gap between visible and actual, when she found the second hiding place. It was in the writing desk. Not the drawer she had already opened, not the surface she had already catalogued. The desk had a false bottom. She discovered it by accident, the way such things are always discovered, by running her hand along the underside of the drawer when she was measuring the dimensions for the restoration log and feeling the slight variation in depth that should not have been there. She stopped. She pressed the panel carefully. It released. Inside was a small envelope. Not old, the paper was not yellowed. Recent, or at least more recent than Caroline's letters. She turned it over. The handwriting on the outside said, "For Alexander, when he is ready." She set it on the desk and looked at it for a very long time. Then she went to find him. Howe was in the estate office with Thomas going over the preliminary schedule for the roofline repair work. She appeared in the doorway, and he looked up, and whatever was in her expression made him say to Thomas, "Give us a moment," before Thomas had finished his sentence. Thomas left without comment. Eleanor set the envelope on the desk between them. Alexander looked at it. He looked at his name in Caroline's handwriting. He looked at Eleanor. "Where?" he said. "False bottom in the writing desk drawer." She kept her voice even. "I was taking measurements. I did not open it." He looked at the envelope. "It is dated," he said. His voice had gone very careful, the particular carefulness of someone maintaining control of something that wants very much to break the surface. 3 years ago. Eleanor looked. He was right. Penciled in the corner of the envelope, small and neat, a date from 3 winters before this one. "She came back," he said. "Or she sent it." "No." He touched the edge of the envelope. "This is not a letter that traveled through the post. There is no address, no seal mark." He paused. "She came back to this room 3 years ago. She left this." The estate office was very quiet. "Alexander," Eleanor said. It was the first time she had used his name without the title. She heard it the moment it left her mouth. So did he. He looked at her with the expression of a man who has just registered something unexpected and is deciding in real time what to do with the registration. "I am sorry," she said. "Your Grace." "No." He said it quickly, almost before she had finished. "Don't." He picked up the envelope. He turned it over again. He set it back down. "She was here, 3 years ago. She was standing in that room." He looked at the window, at the wall, at nothing in particular. Why did she not come to the house? Why did she not? He stopped himself. Eleanor said nothing. She understood that this was not a question directed at her. This was a man working through something out loud, which was different from asking, and the appropriate response was to stay present without interrupting. He picked up the envelope. He opened it. She turned to go. "Stay," he said. Not a command. Not quite a request. Something in between, with the quality of someone who has recognized in this specific moment that being alone is not the same as having privacy and does not always serve the same purpose. She stayed. He read the letter. She watched his face the way she always watched, the way she had learned to watch, not for the performance of emotion, but for the underneath of it, the real movement that happened when something true landed. What she saw was not what she expected. She had expected grief, or the return of grief, or perhaps anger, the anger of someone who had spent 12 years with a wrong story, and has now discovered the wrong story had a coda. What she saw instead was something quieter, something that looked from where she stood remarkably like relief. He finished reading. He held the letter for a moment. He set it down. "She is married," he said. "She has been for 6 years. She has 2 children." He said it without bitterness, without performance, just as information. "She came back to the house because she wanted to leave something for me, and she did not have the courage to knock on the door and deliver it in person." He paused. "I understand that." "What does it say?" He looked at the letter. He read aloud, and his voice was very steady, the steadiness of something that is no longer fighting what it is feeling and is therefore able to hold it properly. "She says, I hope by the time you find this, you have already let someone in. I hope the house is not empty in the ways it was when I knew it. I hope you understand that what I chose was not a verdict on what we were. I was 24 and frightened, and I made a decision I believed was generous, and I have spent 6 years understanding that generous decisions made in fear are still decisions made in fear. I am happy now. I need you to know that I want the same for you. The house deserves to be alive again. So do you." The room held the words for a moment. Eleanor did not speak immediately. She had learned over the course of the past week that silence at Ashcombe Hall was not emptiness. It was where the real things lived. Finally she said, she was not wrong about the house. "No," he said. "She was not." "Is she?" Eleanor stopped, chose a different word. "Are you all right?" He looked at her. The look was direct and without the usual careful management. "I have spent 12 years grieving something that was not what I believed it to be," he said. "I do not know what the correct feeling is for learning that. I am not sure there is one." He paused. "What I know is that I am not devastated. I thought I would be. I thought finding out the truth would be—" He stopped again. "But it is not. It feels like setting something down that I have been carrying in the wrong position for a very long time." Eleanor looked at him across the desk. The October cold was in the room, and the morning light was the flat, honest light of a season that does not flatter. And Alexander Renford looked in that light like someone who was standing up straighter than he had been standing the day before. "What will you do?" she said. "What I should have done 12 years ago," he said. "Live in my own house." He opened the east drawing room that afternoon. Not ceremonially, he simply had Thomas unlock it, went in, looked at it for approximately 60 seconds, and came out and told Thomas to have it aired and the furniture uncovered. Thomas did this with the expression of a man who has been waiting for precisely this instruction for an indeterminate number of years and is not going to say so. Eleanor was in the West Wing when it happened. She heard the activity through the corridor, the sound of furniture being moved. Windows opened, the particular industry of a room being returned to use. She kept working, but she noticed. At 4 o'clock, Sebastian appeared in the West Wing doorway. He had been at the hall for 3 days now, extending his visit with the ease of someone who understood his welcome was genuine and intended to make use of it. He looked at Eleanor with the expression he usually wore, which was cheerful and direct, and concealing a fairly serious amount of intelligence. "He opened the east drawing room," Sebastian said. "I heard. He has not opened that room in 9 years. Sebastian leaned against the doorframe. He had it closed after a particular house party where a guest said something unfortunate about Caroline in front of half the county. Eleanor looked up from her work. "What did they say?" That she had left because she could see he was his father's son, which was meant to be an insult to both of them. Sebastian's voice was easy, but his eyes were not. Alex smiled through it because there were 40 people in the room, and he was not going to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing it land. Then he had the room closed the following morning. He paused. He said it needed repainting. Did it? The paint was perfectly fine. Sebastian watched her work for a moment. He told me about Caroline's letter this morning, the one from 3 years ago. That was between him and you to discuss. He wanted me to know because he wanted me to understand that he was... Sebastian paused, finding the right word. Finished. With the way things were. He looked at her directly. He used the word finished, which for Alexander is a very significant word. Eleanor set down her brush. She turned to face him fully, which she did not always do when they talked. Sebastian registered this and stood up slightly from the doorframe. Say what you want to say, she said. I want to ask you something directly, and I want you to answer it directly, he said. Because I have known Alexander for 25 years, and I have watched him lose the ability to trust people in real time, and I am not going to pretend I am not paying very close attention to what is happening here. Ask. Are you planning to leave at the end of the commission? Eleanor was quiet for a moment. That is the arrangement. That is not what I asked. She looked at him. What happens at the end of a commission is a professional determination, Lord Vale. It is not something I plan in the middle of one. That is a very careful answer. It is the accurate one. Sebastian looked at her for a moment. Then he said, he is going to fall in love with you, if he has not already. I want you to know that I am saying this not as a warning, but as information, because you deserve to have it. He said it plainly without drama. And because Alex does not fall in love the way most people do. He does not perform it. He does not announce it. He simply begins to build his life around a person without quite realizing he is doing it, and by the time he realizes, it is already structural. He paused. The way this house is structural to him. Eleanor said nothing. I am not telling you to do anything with that information, Sebastian said. I am just... He stopped. Then, he has been alone for a very long time, and he has accepted that aloneness as the correct condition for his life. You are the first person who has made him... He looked at her with the simple directness of someone who is saying a hard, true thing because no one else will. Please do not do that accidentally. He left before she could respond. She stood in the West Wing alone and looked at the wall she was repairing and thought about structural things. About the difference between what holds a building up and what decorates the surface of it. About how you can repair the surface indefinitely without addressing the structure, and the surface will keep failing season after season, because the real problem was never the surface. She thought about the word finished. She thought about the way he had said live in my own house that morning, and what it had sounded like, not a resolution, but a beginning. The specific quality of a man who has just understood something that changes the entire context of his next decision. She picked up her brush. Her hands were not entirely steady. She kept working anyway. The consortium's assessor arrived on a Thursday without the advance notice that had been promised and 2 weeks earlier than scheduled. Eleanor found out because she was crossing the front hall when the carriage came through the gate and Thomas appeared at her left elbow, moving faster than his usual measured pace, which was, she had learned, Thomas's version of alarm. Harwick, Thomas said quietly and precisely. He moved the date forward. How far into the West Wing work are we? North wall complete, east wall 60%. The roofline repair is finished on the exterior. Documented. She had documented everything. Every stage, every intervention, every material used, and every assessment made. Her restoration log was at this point 53 pages long. She had kept it that way deliberately, understanding from the moment Alexander had told her about the consortium that documentation was going to matter. Where is His Grace? She said. In the library. Thomas paused. He does not yet know. Then he needs to. She moved toward the library. She found him at his desk. She said without preamble, Harwick is in the front drive. He has moved the assessment 2 weeks forward. She set her restoration log on the desk in front of him. Everything is documented. Every intervention, every date, every material. The West Wing work is 60% complete, and the roofline is fully repaired with photographs taken at each stage. She paused. Do not let him into the West Wing first. Show him the roofline documentation and the East Corridor work. Let the documented evidence set this context before he sees anything in progress. Alexander looked at the restoration log. He looked at her. You prepared for this, he said. I prepared for the possibility, she said. 2 weeks ago when you told me about the letter. He stood. He straightened his coat with the particular economy of a man who has spent a lifetime understanding that appearance is information. He picked up the restoration log. Then he looked at her and said, Come with me. That is not my role. You are the restoration specialist engaged by this estate. Your professional presence during a professional assessment is entirely appropriate. He held her gaze. Come with me. She went. Harwick was a thin man of perhaps 55, with the expression of someone who has already made up his mind and is going through the motions of the process that precedes the conclusion he has already reached. He shook Alexander's hand. He looked at Eleanor with the specific look of a man who has not expected a woman and is recalibrating. Miss Whitfield, Alexander said, is the restoration specialist engaged for the Ashcombe Hall project. She will be able to answer any technical questions about the work in progress. Harwick said, I was not informed of an ongoing restoration project. The notification was in my response to the consortium's initial letter, Alexander said. Page 3, second paragraph. A pause. Harwick had not read the response carefully enough. Eleanor could see this in his face. Shall we begin? Alexander said. They began with the roofline documentation. Alexander presented the log. Eleanor's log, the one she had built entry by entry over 6 weeks, and walked Harwick through the assessment photographs with the calm precision of a man who has the facts on his side and knows it. Harwick asked questions. Eleanor answered them. She answered them with the specific authority of someone who has done this work personally and can speak to every decision with the technical detail that makes challenge impossible. At one point, Harwick said, The West Wing has been identified as a concern. The West Wing is currently under active restoration, Alexander said. It has been sealed for 12 years. It has been preserved for 12 years, Eleanor said, calmly, with the same tone she used to discuss water ingress and plasterwork. Preservation and neglect produce different physical evidence. The documentation distinguishes clearly between the two. She looked at Harwick directly, which I am happy to walk you through if you would like the technical explanation. Harwick looked at her. She held his gaze. He looked at Alexander. I would like to see the West Wing. Of course, Alexander said. They took him to the West Wing. Eleanor walked ahead into the room first, because it was her professional space, and she understood that the way you entered a room told people what they were walking into. She moved through it with the confidence of someone on their home ground, which it was, she had realized sometime in the past 3 weeks, in the specific way that a workspace becomes home ground when you have put enough careful hours into it. She showed Harwick the north wall. She showed him the repaired window frame. She showed him the plaster treatment records and the humidity logs she had been keeping and the material provenance documentation for everything she had brought in. She did not show him Caroline's letters. Those were not relevant to the structural assessment. Harwick stood in the center of the room and looked around and said, This appears to be significantly advanced. 6 weeks of work, Eleanor said. We began immediately upon commission. The commission began when? The day I arrived. She met his eyes. I have the initial inspection notes from that morning if you need to verify the timeline. He looked at her. He looked at Alexander. He said without particular grace, The consortium will require a full written report. Miss Whitfield's restoration log is available in full, Alexander said. I will have Thomas prepare a copy. Harwick left 40 minutes later with a sealed copy of the log and the expression of a man who had arrived expecting to find evidence of neglect and had found instead 53 pages of meticulous professional documentation that made his position significantly more difficult to maintain. The carriage cleared the gate. Eleanor stood in the entrance hall and let out a breath she had been holding for 2 hours. Alexander stood beside her. 60%, he said. You told Thomas 60%. It is closer to 65, but I did not want to overstate. You have been building that documentation as a legal defense since the first week. I have been building it as a professional record since the first week, she said. It happens to also function as a legal defense. He looked at her. The look lasted a moment longer than necessary, and in that extra moment was something that had been building for weeks. Not announced, not performed, simply there. The way structural things are there underneath the surface, holding everything up. Thank you, he said. You thanked me already, for the letter, for the first week. I am thanking you again, for this. She looked at the door through which Harwick had just left. He will be back, she said. The consortium will not accept one assessment as final if it does not give them what they wanted. I know. You need proper legal representation, not just Thomas managing correspondence. Sebastian has a solicitor he trusts. Then call Sebastian's solicitor. She turned to face him. This week, before Harwick files his report. He nodded. Then, you think about things 3 moves ahead. I think about what happens when something goes wrong, she said. It is the same skill. You learn it when you work with fragile things. He looked at her for a moment. There was something in his expression she had been seeing more frequently over the past week. Not the careful management, not the controlled distance, but something underneath those something that had started coming through as the management got thinner. She did not name it. She noted it. Eleanor, he said. She went still. He had used her name twice now. Each time it had arrived differently. The first time like an accident. This time like a decision. What is happening here, he said. Not a question. A statement made with the specific intention of making it out loud, of giving it the reality of spoken words, rather than leaving it in the managed distance of the unspoken. Between us. I am not asking you to define it. I am telling you that I am aware of it. She looked at him. I am also aware of it, she said. And? She was quiet for a moment. And I do not think either of us should make a decision about it in the middle of a legal threat and an incomplete restoration. That is very practical. I am a very practical person. You are, he said. It is one of... He stopped, chose a different word. It is something I have noticed. She held his gaze for one more moment. Then she turned and walked back toward the West Wing, because the work was not finished, and she had learned a long time ago that the only honest answer to the middle of something was to keep going. She heard him behind her, not following. She heard him go to his study. She heard the door close. She breathed. The letter arrived at 10 o'clock the following morning. It was not from the consortium. It was addressed to Eleanor, not Alexander, in handwriting she had never seen before. Thomas brought it to the West Wing with the same careful neutrality he brought everything, and Eleanor set down her work and opened it. It was from a woman named Caroline Ashby, née Ferris. The first line read, I understand a restoration specialist named Eleanor Whitfield is currently engaged at Ashcombe Hall. I am writing because I believe there is something you should know before you proceed further for your own sake, and not for mine. Eleanor read the letter. She read it twice. She set it on the work table and looked at it for a long time. Then she picked up her coat. She found Alexander in the library. Sebastian was there too, which meant the conversation she needed to have was not the private one she had prepared herself for. I need to speak with you, she said to Alexander. Alone. Sebastian stood immediately. I will stay, Alexander said. He looked at Eleanor. Whatever it is, Sebastian can hear it. She considered this for 2 seconds. Then she set the letter on the table between them. Alexander read it. Sebastian read it over his shoulder. What the letter contained was this. Caroline had not only come back to Ashcombe 3 years ago to leave the envelope in the writing desk. She had also, before she left, spoken to someone in the county, a woman named Mrs. Alderton, the wife of a landowner adjacent to the Ashcombe estate. She had not meant to cause harm. She had been visiting a mutual acquaintance and had said too much in the way that people say things when they are trying to explain a complicated decision to someone who asks a direct question that she had left Alexander, not because he had failed her, but because she had believed at the time that leaving was the right choice for both of them. Mrs. Alderton had told her husband. Her husband was on the consortium's advisory board. They had been sitting on this information, the information that Alexander's public reputation as the man who had been abandoned by his fiancée was based on a story that the woman herself had effectively corrected for 3 years. They had been sitting on it, Caroline wrote, because it was useful to certain people that the story remain as it was. She had found out only last week what they had done with her words. She was writing immediately. "I cannot undo what was set in motion," she wrote. "But I can tell you what I told Mrs. Alderton, because you deserve to have it directly, rather than through the consortium's version of it. Alexander Renford is not a man who failed anyone. He is a man who stayed when staying was the only honorable choice, and I left because I could not bear to be the reason he regretted staying. If someone is using my departure as evidence of his character, they are using something they do not understand correctly." Alexander looked up from the letter. Sebastian said, "Alderton." He said it the way you say a name when it confirms something you have been suspicious of for some time. "He has been on the consortium from the beginning." He brought Harwick in. "He has had this for 3 years, Alexander said. His voice was very quiet. The specific quiet of controlled anger, which was entirely different from the absence of anger. "He has been building the consortium's case using information that directly contradicts the case he was building. Because if it became public that you were not what the consortium claimed, the claim falls apart." Alexander set the letter down. He stood. He moved to the window and stood with his back to them for approximately 10 seconds, which Eleanor had learned was his version of taking a breath. Then he turned back around. He was not protecting a reputation. He was managing information to serve an acquisition strategy. "Yes," Sebastian said. "The northern woodland parcel." "Yes," Eleanor said. "This letter combined with the documentation from the assessment changes the legal position significantly." Both men looked at her. "The consortium's case rests on a narrative of mismanagement and character evidence that is circumstantial at best," she said. "The narrative depends on the public understanding of why Caroline left. If Caroline herself has provided a written account contradicting that understanding..." She paused. "It is not a lawsuit. It is not a criminal matter. But it is the difference between a claim that has weight and a claim that does not." Alexander looked at Caroline's letter. He looked at Eleanor. "She is trying to help," he said. Not with bitterness. Not with the complicated feeling that might have accompanied those words a week ago. Just as a simple observation. "She is," Eleanor said. "She has been trying to help since the beginning. She made a decision 12 years ago that she believed was help. She is making one now." She paused. "People who love people try to help them. Sometimes the help is wrong. Sometimes it arrives late. But the intention is usually real." Sebastian looked between them. He had the expression of a man watching something he has been waiting to see arrive, trying very hard not to make it obvious that he is watching. "Call your solicitor," Eleanor said to Alexander. "Today. Not Sebastian's, yours. Someone who knows the property and the history. Give him this letter and my documentation log, and let him tell you what is possible. And Harwick's report will be filed based on what he observed at a professional worksite in active restoration with documentation that contradicts every specific claim the consortium has made." She held his gaze. "His report is going to be a problem for him, not for you." Alexander was quiet. He looked at the letter. He looked at Eleanor. He said, "You walked into Ashcombe Hall 6 weeks ago to fix a ceiling." "The ceiling is almost done," she said. "That is not what I mean." She held his gaze. "I know what you mean," Sebastian said very quietly to no one in particular. "I am going to take a very long walk." He left. The library was quiet. The October cold had deepened overnight into something that felt more like November, and the fire had been lit and was doing its work, and the afternoon light through the windows was the low, flat light of late autumn that did not pretend to be anything other than what it was. Alexander crossed the room. He did not stop at the careful distance. He stopped 2 feet from her, close enough that she was aware of it, close enough that the management of it became conscious and deliberate. "I told Sebastian last night," he said, "that I did not know what was happening between us. You told me something similar. I was not being accurate." He looked at her directly. The look was unmanaged. Entirely, completely unmanaged for the first time since she had met him. The face of a man who has stopped deciding what to show and is simply being seen. "I know exactly what is happening. I have known for at least 3 weeks. She said nothing. "What I did not know," he said, "was what to do with knowing it. Because the last time I knew it, I made a choice based on everything I believed was right. And the person I loved spent 12 years suffering for it. And I spent 12 years suffering for a version of it that was not even real." He paused. "I was afraid that the knowing was not the problem. That the knowing was the easy part. That the part that comes after the knowing was where everything would go wrong again." Eleanor looked at him. "Alexander," she said. His name, not his title. He looked at her the way he had looked at Caroline's letter that morning. The way he looked at things when he was done managing them. "I am still here," she said. 6 weeks in, 3 more to go before the legal assessment resolves. The West Wing is not finished. The East Corridor is not finished. She held his gaze with the same steadiness she brought to everything. "And I have not in 6 weeks given you a single reason to believe that I am going anywhere before the work is done." He absorbed this. "The work," he said, "is real," she said. "All of it." He looked at her for a long, quiet moment. Something settled in his face. Not relief exactly, but the thing that comes just after relief, when you have been holding a door shut for a very long time, and you have finally accepted that what is on the other side of it is not what you were afraid of. He reached out. He took her hand. Not dramatically. The way he did things, simply precisely with intention. He held it for a moment. Then he let go. "Dinner tonight," he said. "Yes," she said. "And tomorrow you will tell me what still needs to be done in the West Wing." "Tomorrow," she agreed. "And the day after." She left the library. She walked back to the West Wing, to the work, to the careful daily business of putting something broken back together, with enough patience and enough skill and enough willingness to stay that it eventually held. Behind her in the library, Alexander picked up Caroline's letter. He read it once more. Then he folded it carefully and placed it with the others, not in the drawer, not hidden. On the desk, in the light. Where things belonged, when they were no longer secrets. He picked up the correspondence log and found his solicitor's address. He began to write. Outside, the first snow of the season was beginning thin and tentative, and not yet committing the way beginnings always looked before they became something you could count on. The solicitor's name was Edmund Graves, and he arrived at Ashcombe Hall on a Friday morning with a leather case, a quiet manner, and the specific focused energy of a man who has read the documentation sent to him and has already formed several opinions he is prepared to defend. He shook Alexander's hand. He looked at Eleanor with the frank assessment of someone deciding in real time how much weight to give her presence in the room. Eleanor set her restoration log on the table between them. Graves looked at it. He picked it up. He turned through the first 15 pages with the speed of someone who reads documents professionally and knows immediately what he is looking at. Then he set it down and said, "Who compiled this?" "I did," Eleanor said. Every entry, every photograph, every material provenance record." Graves looked at Alexander. "Where did you find her?" "She found me," Alexander said. Graves almost smiled. He opened his own case. "All right, let us begin." The meeting lasted 3 hours. Eleanor had not expected to be at the center of it. She had expected to present the restoration documentation and step back while the legal strategy was discussed between the two men. Instead, Graves directed questions at her with the same frequency he directed them at Alexander, and the questions were specific and technical, and she answered all of them with the same direct precision she brought to everything. At the 2-hour mark, Graves said, The consortium's position depends on two things. First, a narrative of mismanagement, which your documentation effectively dismantles. Second, a character argument. The implication that a duke who was abandoned by his fiancée and has lived as a recluse for 12 years is not a man to be trusted with the administration of a significant estate. He paused. The character argument is the more difficult one to address legally, because it is not technically false. The public record of events exists. The public record of events is incomplete, Eleanor said. Yes, Graves said. Caroline Ashby's letter helps. But a letter from the woman herself explaining her departure provided 12 years after the fact requires corroboration to carry full weight. The room was quiet for a moment. Alexander said, "What kind of corroboration? Someone who was present at the time, who can speak to the actual sequence of events from a position of direct knowledge." Graves looked at his notes. "Someone whose testimony would be difficult to dismiss," Sebastian said from his chair in the corner, where he had been sitting with the stillness of someone who has been waiting for his moment. "I was present." Everyone looked at him. "I was at Ashcombe Hall the week before Caroline left," he said. "I know what happened. I know what Alex's father's condition was. I know what Alex told Caroline and what Caroline told Alex, and I know the specific conversation that happened the night before she made her decision." He looked at Alexander. "I have never spoken about it publicly because you never asked me to. But I was there, Alex. And if Graves needs a corroborating witness, I am right here." Alexander looked at his oldest friend. "You never told me you knew." "You never asked," Sebastian said, again, quietly. "And you were so certain about what had happened that I did not think adding my version of it would help. You had already built the wall." He paused. "I should have said something. That is on me. I am saying something now." The silence in the room was the particular silence of something that has been held in place for a very long time and has just been released. Graves said carefully, "Lord Vale, if you are willing to provide a written account of what you witnessed, I believe we can construct a response to the consortium's character argument that is substantially airtight." "I will provide whatever you need," Sebastian said. He was looking at Alexander. "Whatever you need." Alexander looked at the table. He looked at Sebastian. He said, "I should have asked you." "You should have," Sebastian agreed. "But you did not, and I did not push. And here we are 12 years later fixing it." He said it without accusation. Simply. The way old friends speak when they have run out of patience for the careful management of difficult truths. "We are fixing it now. That is what matters." Eleanor looked at the restoration log on the table. She thought about something she had told Oliver once in a different context, about how the most important thing you could do with a damaged object was stop the ongoing deterioration before you tried to repair anything. Stop it getting worse. That was always the first step. 12 years of a wrong story had been getting worse by accumulation. Every year of silence had added another layer of damage, but they were stopping it now. Graves closed his case. "I will file a formal response to the consortium's claim within the week. I will include Miss Whitfield's documentation as a primary exhibit and Lord Vale's account as supporting testimony." He stood. "I will also be writing separately to Mr. Alderton's solicitor regarding the question of withheld information. That is a separate matter, but it is one worth making clear we are aware of." He left. Thomas showed him to the door. The three of them sat in the room after he had gone in the particular quiet of people who have just moved a very heavy thing and are resting before the next stage. Sebastian said, "Well." "Yes," Alexander said. "That went better than I expected." "You had no idea how it would go." "No," Sebastian agreed cheerfully. "But it helps to walk in with good documentation." He looked at Eleanor. "Where did you train?" "My father," she said. "And 3 years with a firm in Edinburgh, and every house I have worked in since." "Your father trained you well." "He trained me to look at things honestly," she said. "Everything else followed from that." Sebastian nodded. He stood. He stretched with the ease of a man who is comfortable in his body and does not pretend otherwise. "I am going to write my account now, while everything is clear in my mind." He paused at the door. "Alex, for what it is worth, and I recognize it is several years overdue, I am glad this is happening." He did not specify what this was. He did not need to. He left. Alexander and Eleanor sat across from each other at the table, where the restoration log still lay open between them. He looked at it. He turned a page. He said, "Page 37." She looked. Page 37 was the entry from the day she had found the false bottom in the writing desk. The entry read in her handwriting, "Secondary concealed storage located in writing desk West Wing. Contents, one sealed envelope addressed to H.G. Delivered immediately. Contents unknown to restorer." He looked at that entry for a long moment. "You documented it," he said. "Everything goes in the log. You documented that you found it and delivered it without reading it." He looked up. "You put it on the record." "Yes." "Why?" She held his gaze. "Because if anyone ever questions the chain of custody of anything found in this house during my work, I want the record to be clear." She paused. "And because you deserve to have it documented that you were treated honestly." He closed the log. He put his hand flat on the cover. He was quiet for a moment. "My father used to say," he said, "that the only true measure of a person's character was what they did with information they could have used against you and chose not to." He looked at her. "I used to think that was a counsel of cynicism. I now think it was a counsel of precision." "Your father sounds like he was a careful man." "How was?" "He was also wrong about some things." He paused. "He believed that vulnerability was the same as weakness. He believed that a duke who allowed himself to be known was a duke who could be manipulated." He looked at the log under his hand. "I believed it too for a very long time. And now I think the opposite is closer to the truth." He met her eyes. "A man who does not allow himself to be known cannot be understood. And a man who cannot be understood cannot be trusted in the ways that actually matter." He paused. "He can be obeyed. He can be feared. He can be respected at a distance, but he cannot be trusted." She said, "Is that what you want, to be trusted?" He looked at her. "I want to be known," he said. "That is what I want. I have not wanted that in 12 years. I am not entirely sure I knew I had stopped wanting it." He paused. "Until 6 weeks ago." Eleanor looked at the table. She thought about Sebastian's words in the West Wing. He does not fall in love the way most people do. He begins to build his life around a person without quite realizing he is doing it. She thought about the East drawing room opened on a quiet afternoon after 9 years. The East corridor ceiling addressed because the work demanded it. Caroline's letters moved from the hidden drawer to the desk. The solicitor called the case being built the wall coming down piece by piece in the particular order that things come down when someone has finally decided they are going to let them. "The West Wing," she said, returning to practicality because practicality was what she did when she needed time. "We are at 80%. Another week, perhaps 10 days for the remaining wall treatments and the floor assessment. And then it is finished. Structurally, the finishing work, the wall, covering the furnishings, the final details, that is a question of what you want the room to be. What do you think it should be?" She looked at him. "That is not my determination to make. I am asking your opinion." She was quiet for a moment. It was someone's private room, full of her choices, her taste, her particular way of living in a space. She paused. "I would not erase that. But I would not preserve it as a memorial either. Neither feels right." She looked at her hands. "I would keep the bones of it, the proportions, the light, the things that make it what it is, and make it somewhere that could be lived in. Not a tribute and not an erasure. Just a room that is part of the house again." He looked at her for a long moment. "Like the rest of it," he said. "Yes," she said. "Like the rest of it." The dinner that evening was the most ordinary they had had since she arrived. Ordinary, in the sense that Sebastian talked too much about a horse he was considering purchasing, and Alexander told him with the specific flat patience of an old friend exactly what was wrong with the horse's pedigree, and Eleanor ate without contributing to the horse debate, but made 2 comments that were relevant and that both men listened to, without the particular adjustment that sometimes happened when she spoke in rooms where she had not been expected. She noticed the absence of the adjustment. After dinner, when Sebastian had taken his wine to the east drawing room to write his account for Graves, Alexander and Eleanor sat in the library. Not by arrangement, they had not said, "Let us sit in the library." They had simply both moved in that direction when the dining room was done with the ease of people who have developed the habit of sharing a space. She had a book. He had correspondence. They were quiet. At 10 o'clock he said, without looking up from his letters, "There is a county gathering next week. It is not a formal event. Agricultural society, half the county attends. I have not attended in 4 years. Why not? Because attending meant managing 200 people's carefully neutral expressions for an entire evening." He set down his pen. "I was invited this year, as I am every year. I did not intend to go. And now?" He looked at her. "I would like you to come with me." Eleanor set down her book. "As the restoration specialist," he said, "you have a professional interest in the county's understanding of what estate restoration involves. The gathering would be an appropriate venue." He paused. "That is the practical framing. The actual reason is that I would like you beside me." She held his gaze. "Those are different things." "Yes," he said. "They are." She picked up her book. She turned a page without reading it. "What time does it begin?" He almost smiled. 7. "Then I will need to finish the West Wing's east wall by 4, she said, "to have time to change." He went back to his correspondence. She read 2 pages of her book without absorbing a single sentence. Lady Margaret found Eleanor in the east corridor the following morning. She had the expression she wore when she had decided something and intended to communicate it efficiently. Eleanor had come to recognize this expression in the first week and had developed a healthy respect for it. "I hear you are attending the Agricultural Society gathering," Lady Margaret said. "His Grace mentioned it. He mentioned it to me as well. He said, and I quote directly, 'I believe Miss Whitfield would find the county's agricultural management discussions relevant to her professional understanding of estate operations.'" Lady Margaret looked at Eleanor with the dry precision of a woman who has been listening to her nephew speak for 65 years and can identify the distance between what he says and what he means. What he actually said, in the version of events that has any relationship to reality, is that he wants to walk into that room with you beside him. Eleanor kept her hands moving on the wall she was assessing. He was quite clear about both framings. Was he? Lady Margaret was quiet for a moment. "He has not wanted to walk into a room with anyone beside him in 12 years. I know." Eleanor. Lady Margaret used her name the way she used everything with intention. "I want to say something to you that I would not ordinarily say, because I am not ordinarily in situations that require it." Eleanor stopped working. She turned. Lady Margaret looked at her with the directness of someone who has decided that the appropriate response to this moment is total honesty. "My nephew is not a man who recovers quickly from things," she said. "He is thorough. He is careful. He does not do things partially." She paused. "When he let Caroline in, he let her in completely. When she left, the closing was complete. When he built the wall was complete." She looked at Eleanor steadily. "If he is opening again, and I believe he is, I can see it in the way this house is breathing differently than it was 6 weeks ago, it will be complete. And if that opening is met with anything other than honesty, the closing will be permanent." Eleanor held her gaze. "I understand," she said. "I am not warning you away," Lady Margaret said. "I am telling you that what you decide here has weight, more weight than you may fully appreciate yet." She paused. "And I am also telling you that I have watched a great deal of the world come and go in 65 years, and I have not seen my nephew look at anyone the way he looks at you." She left. Eleanor stood in the east corridor with her hand against the wall and thought about the word complete, about what it meant when a person did things completely, about the kind of trust that had to be in place before you could let someone in completely, about the fact that she had been telling herself for 6 weeks that she was here for the work, and the work was real, and the work was what she was, and she had been right about all of that. She had not been entirely honest about the rest of it. She went back to work. She worked for 4 hours without stopping, and the east wall of the West Wing was done by noon. The county gathering was held at Caldwell House, and Eleanor noticed 3 things the moment they walked in. The first was that the room noticed Alexander. Not with the hostile attention of people waiting for a spectacle, and not with the nervous avoidance she had expected based on the picture of his social life she had assembled from 6 weeks of observation. It was different. Cautious, perhaps. Recalibrating. The specific attention of people who have held a fixed opinion of someone for a long time and are receiving information that complicates the opinion. The second was that the room noticed her. Not as an accessory to Alexander's entrance. As a person independently recognized. She saw it in 2 separate exchanges within the first 10 minutes. A woman who had heard of her work from a mutual connection in Dorset. A land manager who had been advised by Thomas about the roofline documentation and wanted to understand her methodology. She was not introduced by Alexander. She was already known. She had not expected that. The third thing she noticed was Mrs. Alderton. The woman was 50, well-dressed with the expression of someone managing anxiety by being very still. She was looking at Eleanor from across the room with an expression that was not hostile, but was not comfortable either. Eleanor excused herself from the land manager conversation and crossed to her. Mrs. Alderton looked startled. She had clearly not expected to be approached. "Mrs. Alderton," Eleanor said, "I believe you know why I wanted to speak with you." The woman's composure held barely. "Miss Whitfield, yes, I imagine I do." "I am not going to make this difficult," Eleanor said. "Not unkindly, simply directly. Mrs. Ashby wrote to me. I understand what you told your husband and why." She paused. "I am asking as directly as I know how to ask something whether you are willing to speak with His Grace's solicitor, to give your account of what Mrs. Ashby told you and when." Mrs. Alderton looked at her hands. "My husband is in a legal position that will become significantly more uncomfortable if this proceeds to a formal hearing," Eleanor said. "What Mrs. Ashby told you directly contradicts the foundation of the consortium's character argument. If your husband has been advised of that contradiction and has suppressed it, his position is not merely unfortunate, it is untenable." Mrs. Alderton was very still. "He did not mean harm," she said quietly. "He saw an opportunity, and he—" "Yes," Eleanor said. "I know that is true. I also know that meaning well and doing well are not the same thing, and the gap between them has caused a great deal of damage in this case." She held the woman's gaze. Speaking now before a formal hearing is significantly different from being called to speak at one. A long moment. "I will contact the solicitor," Mrs. Alderton said, "before the week is out." "Thank you," Eleanor said. She turned back to the room. Alexander was 20 feet away in conversation with a man she did not recognize, and he was looking at her over the man's shoulder with the expression he had been wearing more frequently over the past week, the unmanaged one, the one that arrived when he had stopped deciding what to show. She held his gaze for a moment. He said something brief to the man he was speaking with and crossed toward her. "Mrs. Alderton," he said, "has agreed to speak with Graves," Eleanor said. He stopped. He looked at her. She was here," Eleanor said. "It seemed efficient." He looked at her for a moment that was slightly too long to be purely evaluative. "You," he said, "are extraordinary." She looked at the room. "I am practical. Eleanor." He said her name the way he was saying it more often now, not as an address, but as a form of attention. The way you say a word when you want the word itself to do the work of communicating that you are paying complete attention. She looked at him. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Not here, not in the middle of a room full of people, but tonight when we are back at the house." He held her gaze. "Tonight." "All right," she said. They stayed for another hour. They moved through the room together, not performing togetherness, not making any public announcement of anything, but present in the same space, in the easy way of people who have learned each other's rhythms, and are no longer conscious of accounting for them. Sebastian found them at 9 o'clock. He had arrived separately and materialized at Eleanor's elbow with the particular energy of someone carrying news. "Alderton just left," he said quietly. I watched his face when he saw Mrs. Alderton in the corner. He knows something has shifted. He looked at Eleanor. "Whatever you said to her moved quickly." "She made her own decision," Eleanor said, "with the right information." Sebastian looked between them. "Graves received a message this afternoon. Alderton's solicitor has requested a meeting, tomorrow morning." Alexander said, "Already." "Already," Sebastian confirmed. "Which means Alderton has been told that his position is no longer what he believed it was, and he is moving to manage the damage before it manages him." He paused. "This is good. This is very good. The consortium without Alderton's active support is a significantly less threatening entity." "It is not resolved," Alexander said. "No, but the direction of travel has changed." Sebastian looked at Eleanor with the expression she had come to recognize as his version of deep, genuine feeling expressed through studied understatement. "You have done something quite remarkable in 10 weeks, Miss Whitfield." "The restoration work has 6 days left," she said. "I was not talking about the restoration work." She held his gaze. She did not look at Alexander. "I know," she said. The carriage back to Ashcombe Hall was quiet, not uncomfortably so. The quiet of two people who have been in a room full of other people for 3 hours and are letting the noise settle. The carriage moved through the November dark, and Eleanor watched the road through the window and thought about what he had said. Tonight, she thought about 12 years. About the specific damage that comes from a wrong story held too long. About the way a house breathes differently when something true has been let back in. She thought about 6 more days. The carriage stopped. Thomas opened the door. They went inside. In the entrance hall, Alexander said, "The East Drawing Room." She followed him. The room had been open for 3 weeks now. It had lost the particular quality of sealed spaces, the cold, still air, the sense of a moment preserved against its will. It was simply a room now. A good one with high ceilings and a fireplace that Thomas had clearly kept going, and chairs that had been in use, and a quality of inhabitation that was genuinely different from the rest of the house. He closed the door. He turned to face her. He said, "I have been thinking about what to say since this afternoon, and I have decided that I am going to say it simply, rather than carefully, because everything I have done carefully for the past 12 years has been wrong." She said nothing. She waited. "You came here for the restoration work," he said. "That is true. The work is real, and it is the reason you came, and I am not diminishing it." He paused. "But somewhere in the past 10 weeks, what has been happening in this house has become the most important thing that has happened to me in longer than I can accurately measure. And the center of it is not the West Wing, and it is not the legal case, and it is not Caroline's letters." He looked at her directly. "It is you." The fire moved in this grate. "I am not asking you to decide anything tonight," he said. "I am not asking you for anything. I want to be completely clear about that." He held her gaze. "I am simply telling you what is true, because I spent 12 years not telling the truth about important things, and I am finished with that." Eleanor looked at him. She had been waiting. She realized for the moment when she would feel the ground shift, when something would happen that would make this feel real, rather than managed, felt, rather than observed. She had been waiting for it without acknowledging she was waiting for it. It was happening now. "I have not been entirely honest with myself," she said, "about what this has become for me." He was very still. "I told myself I was here for the work," she said. And that was true. I told myself that the commission would end, and I would assess what had happened professionally and decide accordingly. That was also true. She paused. What I did not tell myself until recently was that the assessment was already complete, and the decision was already made, and I was using the work as a reason to stay until I was ready to admit that. He looked at her. The firelight made his face very clear, completely clear. "Are you ready?" he said. She breathed. She crossed the room. She stopped in front of him, closed the careful distance gone, and she looked at him with the same direct, honest attention she gave everything she cared about. "The West Wing will be finished in 6 days," she said. "Yes." "After that, the commission is complete." "Yes." "I do not want the commission to be complete," she said. "I want to stay, not for the work." She held his gaze. "For this." He reached out and took her hand. Not as he had in the library, not briefly, not with the careful management of something being tested. He took it the way a man takes the hand of a person he intends to keep. They stood in the east drawing room of Ashcombe Hall, in the room that had been closed for 9 years and was now open with the fire going and the November dark outside the windows. And they did not say anything else for a long moment, because there was nothing else that needed to be said. Then he said quietly, "There is something else I need to tell you." She waited. "The consortium," he said. "Alderton's position is weakening. Graves believes the claim will be withdrawn before a formal hearing. But there is a condition that Alderton's solicitor is expected to propose tomorrow." "What condition?" He looked at her. "They want the northern woodland parcel released for sale. Not to Alderton, not directly. They want it released to the open market, and they will withdraw the claim entirely." He paused. "It would resolve the legal matter cleanly. And what is the woodland parcel worth to the estate?" "Practically, it is managed woodland. The timber income is modest. The land itself is not the most productive section of the estate." He paused. "My father planted it. He planted every tree in it personally over 20 years. Eleanor was quiet. "It is not sentimentality," Alexander said. "Or it is not only sentimentality. The woodland serves as a windbreak for the northern farm fields. Without it, the exposed fields lose productivity. The practical and the personal are in this case the same argument." "Then you are not going to accept the condition," she said. He looked at her. "No." "Which means the hearing may proceed." "Which means the hearing may proceed." She looked at their joined hands. She thought about the restoration log. 53 pages of documented evidence. Sebastian's account. Caroline's letter. Mrs. Alderton's coming testimony. She thought about Graves sitting in a solicitor's office somewhere, reading through the file with the focused attention of a man who has been given very good material to work with. "Then we go to the hearing," she said. He looked at her. "You said we." "Yes," she said. "I did." He looked at her for a long, quiet moment. He raised their joined hands slightly, a gesture so small it barely registered, but she felt it as clearly as she would have felt a shout. "We go to the hearing," he said. Outside the November dark, pressed against the windows of Ashcombe Hall, and inside in the east drawing room that had been closed for 9 years and was now open and lit and alive. Two people stood together and looked at the difficulty in front of them, and neither of them looked away. The wall was not entirely down. There were still stones in it, still sections that had not yet been dismantled, still the particular weight of 12 years and a wrong story, and everything that had accumulated around them. But the door through it was open, and they were standing on the same side. Alderton's solicitor arrived at Graves's office at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday morning and left at 11:45 with nothing he had come for. Graves reported this to Alexander by letter that afternoon, with the particular economy of a man who understood that the important thing was not the drama of the meeting, but the outcome of it. The outcome was this: Alderton had authorized his solicitor to offer the withdrawal of the consortium's claim in exchange for the woodland parcel. Graves had declined on Alexander's behalf. Alderton's solicitor had then suggested a reduced acquisition, only the northern section, only 30 acres. Graves had declined again. Alderton's solicitor had spent 20 minutes attempting to reframe the negotiation in terms that made the offer sound like generosity rather than extraction. And Graves had listened to all of it with the patience of a man who knows he has the stronger hand and is in no hurry to play it. At the end of the 20 minutes, Graves had placed on the table a single document. Mrs. Alderton's written account of her conversation with Caroline Ashby, witnessed, dated, and signed. He had let Alderton's solicitor read it. Then he had placed beside it Sebastian Vale's account of the events surrounding Caroline's departure from Ashcombe 12 years earlier. He had said, "The consortium's character argument rests on a public understanding of events that these two documents directly contradict. If this proceeds to a formal hearing, both documents become part of the public record. I imagine you will want to advise your client of that before he determines whether the 30 acres are worth what they will cost him. Alderton's solicitor had asked for a week to consult. Graves had given him 4 days. Alexander read the letter twice. He set it on his desk. He picked up his pen, set it down, and went to find Eleanor. She was finishing the last section of the West Wing floor assessment on her knees with a measuring gauge and a notebook, working with the focused quiet of someone who is close to the end of something and can feel the shape of the completion. She heard him come in. She did not look up immediately. "Graves's letter," he said. Thomas mentioned it arrived. She made a final note. "What did it say?" he told her. She listened without interrupting, which was her way. She gathered the full picture before she responded, never piece by piece. When he finished, she sat back on her heels and looked at the floor she had been measuring. 4 days, she said. Yes. Alderton will fold. Graves believes so. Graves is right. She stood. She brushed her hands against her work apron with the practical efficiency of someone transitioning between tasks. A man who has been managing information for personal gain for 3 years does not go to a formal public hearing when the information has been removed from his control. The risk is too high, and the reward is no longer achievable. "You sound certain." "I am certain," she said. He wanted the land. Without the land, there is no reason to proceed. Without proceeding, the cost of the character damage to his own reputation from the Alderton testimony is a cost he avoids. She looked at Alexander directly. He is going to withdraw before the 4 days are up. He looked at her. He had been looking at her differently for 5 days, since the East drawing room, since she had said, "I want to stay," since the specific evening when something that had been building for 10 weeks had been spoken aloud and had become real in the way that spoken things become real. The looking was not different in kind. It was different in quality. Less managed. More direct. The look of someone who has stopped deciding what to show and is simply present. "The floor assessment," he said. "How bad?" "Not bad at all, actually." She looked at the floor. "The original timber is sound throughout. There is surface damage in the northeast corner that needs treatment, but the structural integrity is excellent." She paused. "Your grandfather built well." "He did. The room is essentially done." She said it quietly. Not as an announcement, but as an observation. The specific quiet of someone arriving at the end of something they have been deeply inside. 2 more days for the final treatments, then it is finished. He was quiet. "The house is not finished," he said. She looked at him. "The east corridor still needs the ceiling work in the spring," he said. "The north kitchen garden drainage problem has not been resolved. There are 3 rooms in the second wing that have not been assessed at all." He held her gaze. "There is a great deal of work left." She understood what he was doing. She understood it clearly and felt the warmth of it move through her chest in the particular way of something that does not need to announce itself to be completely real. "That is true," she said. "I would need someone who understands the full scope of the property," he said. "Someone who has been through the documentation from the beginning." "Yes," she said. "You would." "Eleanor." She looked at him. "Stay," he said. "Not as the restoration specialist. Stay as yourself. Stay because I am asking you to, and because I believe I know that what has been built in this house over the past 11 weeks is worth more than a commission." She did not answer immediately. Not because she did not know the answer. She had known it for at least 3 weeks. She did not answer immediately because she had spent enough time in this house with this man to understand that the right answer given too quickly was its own kind of carelessness. He deserved the weight of it. The real consideration, not the performed kind. "My work," she said. "What I do, I cannot stop doing it. It is what I am." "I know that. There are other commissions, other houses that need what I do. I know that too. I would not be here every day. Some months I would be elsewhere." "I understand." She looked at him. "You have spent 12 years building a life around not needing anyone to be present." "Yes," he said. "And I spent 12 years being very cold and very correct and very alone. And then you arrived and found things behind locked doors that I had convinced myself were not there. and now the house is the warmest it has been in over a decade, and I am not interested in returning to the previous arrangement." He said it without drama, just clearly, directly in the way he said things when he had decided that precision mattered more than protection. "I am not asking you to give up your work. I am not asking you to be here every day. I am asking you to make this your home. Whatever that means, however that looks, your work, your commissions, your independence. All of it, here." The West Wing was very quiet around them. She looked at the room that had been sealed for 12 years and was now repaired and whole and waiting to be lived in. She looked at the north wall she had spent weeks restoring, the window frame she had rebuilt from the inside out. The floor that had been here all along, sound and strong, needing only someone willing to look past the surface damage to see it. She thought about what her father used to say, that a house was not a building, that a building became a house only when someone chose it, chose to put their days into it, their attention, their care, chose to stay when the easier thing was to leave. "Yes," she said. He breathed. Not relief exactly, something deeper than relief. The specific exhale of a man who has been standing at the edge of something for a long time and has finally deliberately stepped forward. He crossed the room. He took her face in his hands, not dramatically, not with the performed tenderness of someone who has rehearsed the moment, and he kissed her with the same quality he brought to everything important, completely, without reservation. When he pulled back, she was looking at him with the expression she wore when she had assessed something and the assessment had confirmed what she already knew. "The floor needs one more treatment," she said. He laughed. It was the first time she had heard him laugh fully, not the almost smile, not the controlled acknowledgement of something amusing, but an actual laugh, warm and unguarded. It changed his face entirely. It made him look 10 years younger and entirely himself. "Tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow," she agreed. Alderton withdrew the claim on the third day, not the fourth, the third. Graves sent a brief letter that arrived at breakfast, and Alexander read it at the table without changing his expression, then set it beside his plate, and said to Thomas, who happened to be present, "Please send a response acknowledging receipt." Thomas took the letter. He read it with the same expression he brought to everything. Then he said, "Very good, Your Grace," in a tone that communicated considerably more than those 3 words. Sebastian, who had extended his visit to a duration that had long since ceased to have any professional justification, looked up from his breakfast with the expression of someone confirming a prediction. "When did you know?" "Eleanor said the third day," Alexander said. Sebastian looked at Eleanor. "He did not want the public record," she said. "Once the documentation existed, the risk outweighed the reward." "You were right," Sebastian said. "I usually am about the way damaged things break down," she said. "It is not a complicated analysis once you understand the structure." Sebastian looked between Eleanor and Alexander with the satisfied expression of a man watching something he has wanted to see for a very long time, finally arriving at its proper conclusion. "I think," he said, "I will stay for Christmas." "You were going to stay for Christmas regardless," Alexander said. "Yes." Sebastian agreed. "But now I have a better reason." The West Wing was formally completed on a Thursday in the 3rd week of November. Eleanor made the final entry in her restoration log at 4 o'clock in the afternoon in the clear, steady handwriting that had been documenting the work since the first day. She noted the completion date, the final treatments applied, the overall condition assessment, the materials used and their provenance, and the professional determination that the room was structurally sound, fully restored, and ready for use. Then she wrote one more line at the bottom of the page below the formal assessment. She wrote, "This room is a good room. It has survived everything asked of it and has done so without losing anything essential." She closed the log. She sat in the room for a moment alone. This was something she always did at the end of a commission, a few minutes in the finished space, just to be in it without working. To let the work settle into the room and the room settle into itself. Most clients did not know she did this. It was not professional protocol. It was simply something she needed. The room was quiet and warm and entirely itself. She stood. She picked up her kit. She walked to the door. She stopped. She turned back and looked at the room one more time. The north wall, the window, the floor. The place where Caroline's letters had been found. The desk that had concealed 12 years of unsent feeling. The space that had been holding its breath since 1812 and could now finally breathe. "Good," she said aloud. Not to anyone, just to the room, the way her father used to say it when something that had been broken was whole again. She left the door open behind her. Tete. Alexander was in the east drawing room when she brought him the completed log. He was standing at the window, which was something he did less than he used to, stood at windows looking out at his own grounds, as though deciding whether he was allowed to be there. He turned when she came in, and she handed him the log without ceremony, and he took it and opened it to the final entry and read it. He read the last line twice. He looked up. "This room is a good room," he said. "Yes, that is not standard restoration assessment language." "No," she agreed. "It is not." He closed the log. He held it. He said, "My father closed it because he could not decide what to do with it. I closed it because I was afraid of what was inside. And now it is open, and there is nothing inside that I cannot look at directly." "No," she said. "That is what you do," he said. "Not just to rooms." She looked at him. "You make it possible to look at things directly." He held her gaze. "You have been doing it since the first morning when you stood in the corridor and told me the West Wing was not damaged, it was abandoned. You were right about that. You were right about everything." He paused. "I would like to know if you would consider being right about things here permanently." She looked at the log in his hands, at the room around them, at the man in front of her who had spent 12 years building walls and had spent the past 11 weeks taking them down one stone at a time with the patient, deliberate care of someone who had finally found a reason to. "Is that a question?" she said. "It is a very poorly executed proposal," he said. "I am aware of that. I had intended to do it better." "You are doing it precisely right," she said. He looked at her. "I do not want a performance," she said. "I have never wanted a performance. I want the real thing said directly by the actual person." She held his gaze. "And that is what I am receiving." He moved to the writing desk in the corner of the room's desk, the house's desk, not Caroline's desk, not the writing desk from the West Wing, but this one, this room's own furniture that had been here for 30 years. He opened the small drawer. He took out a ring. It was simple. A deep blue stone, dark as winter sky set in plain gold. Not elaborate. Not the kind of thing designed to announce itself. The kind of thing designed to last. "This was my mother's," he said. "She wore it every day of her life, and she did not wear anything she did not mean." He held it. He looked at it. He looked at Eleanor. "I am not asking you to be what this house needs, or what society expects, or what fills a role that has been empty. I am asking you because you are the most honest person I have encountered in my life, and I am finished. Being afraid that the most honest person I have encountered will one day conclude, there is not enough here to stay for." Eleanor crossed the room. She took the ring from his hand. She looked at it. She put it on her own finger, and the gesture was so deliberate and unperformed and entirely herself, that something in Alexander's face broke open the last remaining distance. Not pain, the opposite of pain. The thing that comes when the last wall comes down and you discover the room behind it is warm. "I concluded 3 weeks ago," she said, "that there was enough here." He took her hand. He looked at the ring on it. "You put it on yourself," he said. "I had the information I needed to make the decision," she said. "I made it." He looked at her with the full, unmanaged attention that she had first seen at the county gathering and had been receiving in increasing measure every day since. Then he pulled her toward him and held her in the straightforward, unperforming way of a man who has stopped calculating and is simply present, and she let him, and the east drawing room of Ashcombe Hall was quiet and warm around them. The formal hearing before the county magistrate never took place. Alderton's withdrawal was filed on a Friday and acknowledged on the following Monday. The consortium dissolved quietly over the course of the following 2 weeks. its individual members finding with the specific efficiency of people who have been on the losing side of a legal position that they had other priorities. Harwick returned his assessment fee without being asked, which Graves noted was an unusual degree of self-awareness. Sebastian said, "Alderton is going to spend the next 3 years being extraordinarily pleasant to everyone in the county." "He is going to spend the next 3 years being avoided by everyone in the county," Alexander said. "Which is different." "You would know," Sebastian said. Alexander looked at him. "Yes," he said, "I would." There was a pause. "For what it is worth," Sebastian said, "I spent 12 years watching you from the outside of the wall you built. I always thought, given the right conditions, you would come back out." He paused. "I did not expect the right conditions to arrive in the form of a woman with a toolkit and a restoration log, and absolutely no patience for locked doors." "She has patience for the right locked doors," Alexander said. "Yes," Sebastian said. "Just not the wrong ones." Lady Margaret stayed for Christmas. She had not said she was staying for Christmas. She had simply not left after the consortium matter was resolved, which was the same thing expressed in her particular idiom. She organized the household for the season with the efficiency of someone who has been wanting to organize it properly for 9 years and is not going to waste the opportunity now that it has arrived. She found Eleanor in the East Library on a Tuesday afternoon reading. "You are keeping the library organized," Lady Margaret said. "Not a question, an observation." "The filing system was chaotic," Eleanor said. "I am improving it." "You have been improving things in this house for 11 weeks. Lady Margaret sat down. "It looks different." "The restoration work." "I am not talking about the restoration work." Lady Margaret looked at her with the direct, efficient gaze she used when she was about to say something true. "I am talking about the quality of the air, the way people move through the rooms, the way my nephew sits at his own dinner table." She paused. "He laughed last Tuesday." "I heard. He has not laughed like that in 9 years." Lady Margaret folded her hands. "I told you when you first arrived that what you decided here had weight. I want you to know that I was right about that, but not in the way I meant it as a warning." She looked at Eleanor steadily. "I meant it as a warning because I was afraid you would leave. I am telling you now because I want you to understand the full scope of what has changed." She paused. "This house is alive again. My nephew is alive again, and you are the reason." Eleanor set down her book. "He is the reason," she said. "I only opened the doors." "You stayed long enough for him to walk through them himself," Lady Margaret said. "That is not a small thing." "No," Eleanor agreed. "It is not." Lady Margaret looked at the ring on Eleanor's hand. She had not mentioned it directly since Alexander had told her. She had said upon being told simply, "Good," in the tone she used when something she had been privately organizing for some time had finally arrived at the correct outcome. "Your father," she said now. "Would he have approved?" Eleanor thought about her father. About the man who had taught her that a building became a house when someone chose it. Who had trained her to see past the surface damage to the structure beneath. Who had spent his life finding things that were broken and making them whole, and had died before seeing her do it on her own. He would have liked Alexander, she said. He would have taken him apart in conversation the first evening and put him back together more honestly than he started. She paused. He would have said he was a man worth building something with. He would have been right, Lady Margaret said. She rose. She paused at the door. "I am going to organize the Christmas dinner. I expect you to tell me what you want at the table, because you are not a guest, and you are not the restoration specialist, and you live here now, and people who live here do not eat whatever is simply placed in front of them." She left. Eleanor looked at the ring on her finger. She thought about 11 weeks and a locked door and a letter found through a gap in a floor. She thought about the distance between visible damage and actual damage, between the surface story and the structure beneath it. She thought about what it meant to stay. Not just to accept a staying that was offered, but to choose it, to put your name on it, to walk through a door, not because someone held it open, but because you had looked at what was on the other side and decided it was worth walking toward. She picked up her book. She read 2 pages and retained all of it. The West Wing opened formally on the first day of December. Not with ceremony. Alexander had not planned ceremony. He had simply had Thomas unlock the door in the morning and told the household that the room was in use again, and that was the end of it. No announcement, no explanation, just the door open the way a door ought to be. Eleanor walked through it at 9 o'clock with her morning tea and stood in the room she had spent 3 weeks rebuilding and looked at it in the particular December light that came through the north window. The same light she had noted the very first time she stood in the doorway. The same quality that she had recognized immediately as right for the work. The room was warm. Thomas had seen to that. It did not look like a memorial. It did not look like a room that had been sealed for 12 years and then urgently reclaimed. It looked like what she had said. It should look like a room with its bones preserved and its surface renewed, somewhere you could live in without feeling the weight of everything that had happened in it before you arrived. She heard his footsteps in the corridor. He came in and stood beside her and looked at the room the way he had been looking at things lately, fully without the management, with all of himself present and accounted for. "My father would have liked what you did with it," he said. "What did I do with it? Made it useful without making it false." He looked at the north wall. There is a difference between a room that pretends the past did not happen and a room that contains the past without being contained by it. He paused. "You made this the second kind." She looked at the wall she had repaired, at the window frame she had rebuilt, at the floor she had assessed and found sound. "That is all restoration is," she said. "Making room for the present without destroying the evidence of the past." He looked at her. "You are doing that here," he said. "Not just with the house." She turned to look at him. He was watching her with the expression she had come to know as his most honest one. Not the public face, not the managed distance, not the careful precision of a man controlling what he revealed. Simply Alexander. The man behind the title and behind the wall and behind 12 years of incorrect certainty. The man who had been there all along waiting for someone patient enough to find him. "I know," she said. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. A gesture so quiet and ordinary and completely without performance that it landed harder than anything deliberate could have. She felt it in the same place she had felt his laugh the first time she heard it. Deep and warm and entirely real. "Sebastian is leaving on Friday," he said. "I know. He told me yesterday. He said before he leaves he wants a full dinner, everyone at the table, including Thomas, which Thomas will refuse." "Thomas will not refuse," she said. "He has been waiting for a reason to sit at that table for 20 years. Alexander looked at her. "How do you know that?" "Because he is the most devoted person in this house, and the most invisible, and those two things together, in a person always mean they are waiting to be told that they are seen." She paused. "Ask him. Directly. He will say yes." Alexander was quiet for a moment. "You see everyone," he said. "I see what is there," she said. "Most people are visible if you look at them honestly." He looked at her for a long moment. The December light came through the window and fell across the restored floor between them, and the room held them both, the way good rooms hold people without demanding anything, without asking them to be less than they were, simply providing the space for whatever needed to happen. "I spent 12 years," he said, "making certain this house was perfect on the outside." "I know." "It was not a good strategy." "No," she agreed. "It was not." "What is a good strategy?" She looked at the room. She looked at him. She thought about all the things she knew about structure and damage and the difference between what holds a thing up and what decorates its surface. She thought about her father and his files and the way he had trained her to look. She thought about the first morning she had stood in the West Wing corridor and understood before she had a single word for it that what she was looking at was not a damaged house. It was a damaged man who had learned to express his damage in architectural terms. "The same one I use on every restoration," she said. "Stop the ongoing damage first. Then assess the structure honestly. Then rebuild from the inside out." She held his gaze. "And stay until it holds." He looked at her. "You stayed," he said. "Yes." "You are still staying?" "Yes," she said. "I am." He took her hand. They stood in the west wing of Ashcombe Hall, in the room that had been locked for 12 years, and was now open and warm and entirely itself. And outside the December cold was the particular cold of a season that had made its mind up and intended to stay. And inside the house was alive, in the way that houses are alive when the people in them have stopped managing the life out of them and have simply allowed themselves to be in it. The Christmas dinner was on the 24th. Thomas did sit at the table. He had said when Alexander asked him directly that it was irregular. Alexander had said that irregular was no longer a category he found compelling. Thomas had been quiet for a moment, and then said simply, "Thank you, Your Grace," in a tone that confirmed everything Eleanor had told Alexander about what the invitation would mean. Sebastian was at the table. Lady Margaret was at the table. Eleanor was at the table at Alexander's left, in the seat she had taken the first night she arrived, when there had been 2 people at a table for 12, and the distance between them had been the specific distance of 2 strangers in an unfamiliar arrangement. The distance was gone. The candles burned. The food was good. Sebastian talked too much as he always did, and this time Eleanor talked too, and Lady Margaret made 3 observations that were the most efficient things said all evening, and Thomas said very little, but his face said everything. At one point Sebastian raised his glass and said, "To Ashcombe Hall, which has not looked this well in 9 years." 11, Alexander said. 11. Sebastian agreed. They drank. Eleanor looked around the table. At the people who had been drawn one by one into the orbit of this house and this man, and had stayed because staying was what the situation called for. At the walls of the dining room, which she had not restored, but which looked different anyway. The particular difference that comes when a room is being used for what it was built for. At the candles and the food and the voices and the warmth. She thought about the first night she had sat at this table. The 2 place settings in a room built for 12. The careful, measured distance. The man across from her who had said perfectly adequate was supposed to be an insult and had been treating her from the very first moment like she was considerably more than that. She thought about a woman who had spent her professional life in other people's houses, moving carefully through spaces that belonged to someone else, leaving them better than she found them, and moving on. Who had learned to make any place functional and comfortable, and had never quite learned until now what it felt like for a place to be hers. Alexander's hand found hers under the table. Not dramatically, just present. She turned her hand over and held his. The dinner continued. Sebastian told a story about a horse. Lady Margaret corrected 3 factual errors in the story. Thomas laughed once at the 4th. The candles burned lower, and Ashcombe Hall, which had been beautiful for 100 years and cold for 12, and was now warm in every room that mattered, held all of them in the particular way that a house holds people when it has finally, after a long time of being managed and maintained and preserved from the outside, been allowed to be lived in. From the inside out. The way good things are always built. The way good things always last.